Anyway, thanks for coming. I call to order the Appropriations Committee meeting March 14th. We expect Mr. Kalin to join us momentarily, but we've got a quorum and we've got a long night ahead of us, so we'll get started. Before we get started, any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move forward to our first order of business, the approval of minutes for February 29th.
Move that the minutes February 29th be accepted.
All right, motion by Janice. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by George. Any discussion on the minutes?
Only that while I was not here on the committee for that meeting, I did watch it on YouTube, and I was able to go through the minutes. So.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And George, you had a comment on
Yeah, just to comment on the police department presentation. We did spend a considerable amount of time during the meeting discussing the staffing in the police department and adding a patrolman and both the increased volume of calls that the police department's handling in comparison with worthwhile towns. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that we amend the minutes, but it might be worth mentioning that that is available in the recording of our meeting, and anybody that's interested should.
Yeah, good point there. So with all these discussions, now that we have the full recording of the meetings, and with the new format on the minutes link to the recording and the specific presentations, so full details there, and in the case of the police department discussion,
right,
that was a very good discussion.
I think that was we spent a considerable amount of time going over that, so.
Good to see. Thank you for mentioning that. Any other comments? All right, all those in favor? Motion passes. Next up, Assabet Valley Regional Technical High School fiscal year 2025 budget presentation.
Excellent. Well, thank you and good evening. It's always a pleasure to come before the Appropriations Committee to present our new budget, which is FY25. Before I get started, I'd like to make sure I recognized my esteemed colleague and our school committee chair and Northborough rep, Virginia Sims George, has done an outstanding job with her time that she's been on the committee. Was on prior to my start, but has served the last number of years as chair and has done an outstanding job. So I just want to publicly thank Virginia for all of her great work.
That's great. Thank you.
So just quickly, I'll give you a couple quick fast facts. They're not in the packet that you have, but Assabet's been celebrating its 50th year. This year we had a 50th rededication to the building in November. Some interesting artifacts. We have a kind of a I just lost my train of thought. Kind of a time time capsule type display in which we actually have one of the original groundbreaking shovels that was actually given to us by the Dean Goodwin, who was the representative from Berlin, his wife. And there's a whole story behind the shovel, but it was pretty cool to have something that was from groundbreaking when they first, started building the school. Other great artifacts that are in there as well, so if you get a chance to stop by, we'd love to have you tour the building. Besides our 50th year, we're presenting our FY25 budget plan, as well as we're going to just follow up on the stabilization fund that we're looking to establish as well this year. FY24 is the first year, this current year, in which we have a full class of all in-district students. And what that means for the folks that have not been here before, we've shared with the Appropriation Committee in our communities over the years past that we've seen this trend that we've had less out-of-district students and more in-district students have interest and enroll in Assabet. And so what happens with that is we basically have a shifting of how the funding happens, where member assessments would be much lower. At one time when I started in 2015, about a third of our population of students were from out-of-district communities. So they were not being assessed to our member towns, and of course, Chapter 70 foundation money was much lower, your minimum local contribution was much lower, but as you'll see, we've had 47 additional students in the FY24 and we have 48 students based on the enrollment as of October 1st of 2023. So we'll talk more about that. The good news is that Northborough has 67 students as of October 1st. It's an increase of 3 students over the previous October 1, 22 school year. And the assessment from which we originally gave you, which was a $1,457,284, which I think is what is in the budget book, is actually decreased by $48,098. So the new assessment is a $1,409,186. And the reason for the difference is we gave you the number in December before we had our governor's budget numbers. And then when we got those numbers and we worked it, we found that it was going to drop by about $48,000, $49,000. If you turn in your packet that's in front of you and you go just to the first slide, there's the superintendent director's welcome. In a nutshell, I can just give you, I'm not going to read that whole thing, but our overall increase from FY24 is an 8.5% increase, and I can explain how that basically rolls out. There's an increase of $2,137,140. It basically, with that, assumes a 2.8% increase to our regional transportation budget. It's the 5th and final year of a transportation contract. We'll be going out to bid next year. We have all cost of living obligations are included in this budget. The one thing that we aren't sure at this time is health insurance. We've been hearing that it's been coming in at 10% or above in most cases. We do have Harvard Pilgrim at this point in time, and the split is a 75-25 split for any employee that was hired prior to July 1st, 2019, and anybody hired after that, it's a 70-30 split. So we had made some adjustments in that healthcare. We do not have, or actually I should say it's the second year of a 3-year contract for our teachers. And the last thing that I will say is, as I mentioned, we're looking to establish a stabilization fund, and we have $250,000 that we've allocated in this operational budget under our capital improvement fund. And so I'll talk more about that when we get to the stabilization piece. But in a nutshell, if you look at the next page, which says introduction, fast facts, 48 additional students, which basically caused our Chapter 70 funding aid to increase by $738,035. It increased the minimum local contribution, which is our contribution from our communities, by $1,153,548. The regional transportation rate is a reduction based on what we had this year, FY24. It was funded at 95%. The regional transportation reimbursement in the governor's numbers was funded at 80%. When the regional Volk schools were built, or regional schools were built, they had promised funding of 100% of regional transportation reimbursement. However, those two great words at the end that said if appropriated has never allowed it to be at 100%. So whatever the difference is of our total transportation contract, we then have to pass that on to our communities, and you'll see in the chart how it gets broken down based on your enrollment. So you'll see the increase of that $1.8,885,47. That kind of plays into that $2 million increase that I've shared with you of that 8.5%. The next page, page 2, is just some of the topics we're going to cover. Page 3 is some of our drivers. Obviously, we've had more in-district students. We've seen an increase in they're now called multilingual language students. In the past, they've been called English learners, ELs or ELLs. Now they're MLLs, a change from DESE. And then our students with disabilities, we've actually seen our percentage drop slightly. However, we're seeing students with greater needs coming into the building and a higher requirement for services. Obviously, most school districts, we're all dealing with social emotional learning and mental health as well. Assabet is a full inclusion type school, so we have a lot of co-taught classes. So in order to address our special education population, which is about 25% of the student population, we have those students in a general education class and generally there's a co-taught teacher in there, so you'll have a regular math teacher with a special education teacher that focuses on math to assist, so you've got much smaller student-teacher ratio in order to help those students be successful. Let's see. And then the last thing that I'll add on there is, again, the capital improvement funds, as we rely less on out-of-district tuition. That's important because right now we've been relying on grants for any type of capital equipment. Obviously, for vocational school, we have large pieces of equipment. In order to fund those, we've completely relied on grants for that. And even for any kind of capital type projects, improvement projects of the facilities of the grounds, our out-of-district tuition has been able to handle the majority of that over the past 50 years. It was only the time that we came to our communities to ask about the renovation of the building, which was completed in 2016 and is on the debt schedule. Was the first real time we came to our communities to ask for capital improvements. If you look at page 4, we have some staffing adjustments. We're looking at a paraprofessional in special ed, an athletic trainer, and an electives instructor. That instructor will be based on what we get back for program of studies surveys. So it could be a phys ed health teacher, or it could be an art teacher for the elective instructor. That won't be determined until the May-June timeframe. Page 5, and if you have any questions, feel free to just stop me. Page 5, you'll see under Northborough, 5th down from the left. And if you read across, you'll see your numbers across the grade levels. You'll see that there's 67 in this budget, and prior year was 64. So there's an additional 3 students. The bottom left column, you'll see Boylston, Clinton, Shrewsbury, other, and those are the zeros that indicate we have no freshmen from those grade levels coming in. On the upper grades, you can see that we do have students still. So we're going to kind of see this trend for the next 2 years with the budget increasing until we have all, the majority of in-district kids. We may still have a handful of out-of-district kids, as students sometimes move out of the district if they've come in and were in Marlboro and then decided to move to Leicester due to various reasons. So we may still have out-of-district kids, but, most likely in the upper grade levels. I wouldn't guess it's more than a handful. So next page, page 6. We utilize the statutory method of assessment, which is based on Mass General Law, Chapter 76, and basically looks at minimum local contribution, the Chapter 70 funding formula, and then any of the minimum required assessment, which would be transportation, capital project, debt service, or other capital type costs. OPEB is in that as well, and you'll see that in one of the next slides that we have. Page 7 is what is minimum local contribution. It's basically known as the aggregate wealth model. So it's based on each community individually, based on your median wage, and then also how your business commercial tax base has been. And if you were to ask me to explain the formula, it probably would wrap around this room a couple times on an Excel spreadsheet, and I couldn't do it. So, but that's kind of what we use. If you go to page 8, the governor's budget.
Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
So where does Northborough rank in this ability to pay?
Oh, that's a good question. It doesn't necessarily rank you in terms of communities against each other.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to find out is proportionally, is our ability to pay greater than the other members?
Yep. So when we get to page 11, I'll be able to exactly show you
Okay.
an example of that. Yep.
Is the formula you're talking about that would wrap around the room, is that something that's consistent across the state?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a state formula.
Okay.
Just like the Chapter 70 foundation formula for all school districts, it's something that the state
Thank you.
determined. Yep. Good. So if you look at page 9, minimum local contribution, this is the Chapter 70 summary sheet for Assabet. Each of the school districts has this. If you look over to the far right where it says comparison to FY24, obviously FY24 is the year in which we're in right now. FY25, you'll see What the change is, there's the 48 students, I'm up on the top where it says enrollment, top right, and you'll see there's 48 students more. So our enrollment went from 971 to 1,019 of in-district students. If you look at the foundation budget, that's that 1,891,584 number that I shared with you on the first slide. So you'll see that our foundation budget went up to 23 million, and then the required district contribution, that is what our member communities are required to, right, provide to us. And then we do get Chapter 78, which is the 9,832,968. So that's increased. And then required net school spending, basically down at the bottom you'll see it says 100%. So for Assabet, our required net school spending is 100%. At times, our budgets may look at 101% or 102%, but that's the bare minimum of what you can spend on educating students based on what the state has determined. And I have a slide in here that kind of looks at that. And for every community, it's different. If you turn to page, the next page, 10, you'll see that there's a net school spending and foundation for, this is for FY 22 and 23, because I hadn't seen a new one that came out. But if you just look at 23, down at the bottom in the very first in the blue says Assabet. We had been below net school spending. If you remember, I want to say it was a couple years back, but they had talked about having the ability to use a portion of ESSA 2 funding, right, that school districts were going to be able to potentially use to offset. It never went through. We ended up decreasing assessments and then had to regain it back from you. That was a couple years past. So anytime you're below whatever the net school spending that DESI requires, you have to make it up in the following years, and they give you about 2 years to do that. So that means you're spending above what you have for a budget. It may not be getting assessed to the towns, but because you may be using E&D and things of that nature. But Assabet's always usually at 100% or 101, 102%. And I already shared this with Superintendent Martineau. This isn't to, to compare actually Assabet to anybody else, but if you look at Northborough, which is the third from the bottom on the yellow, and you go to the far right, their requirement, Northborough's, as of FY 23, was 168% above net school spending, and they have a 201 is what they actually spend, based on what their numbers are figuring. So, we have been able to all throughout the years, and there's a reason why, is that we've been able to use out-of-district tuition to help pay for costs, right, to offset costs, so those costs aren't shared to member districts. Obviously, that above net school spending is because Northborough requires the school district, because you want the high-quality education that's provided, so you're spending extra dollars to have that happen. Right, so that's why it shows like that. You've made that determination. For us, when we do it, on paper, it looks a little misconstruing. It's because we've been able to use out-of-district money to kind of get that percentage up, okay? If we move to the minimum local contribution tab, this is what Janice had asked me about, and kind of how they rank things. If you look at the bottom, third from the bottom, it says 213 Northborough. You'll see in FY 24, we had 64 kids, now we have 67 for FY 25. The change of 3 is there, okay? And if you look at your change from FY 24 to 25, it's about 91,035 for those 3 students, okay? If you look at Southborough, they also had a change of 3 students, but their change is only 73,000. Based on the minimum local contribution of their aggregate wealth model. So based on their median wages and the aggregate wealth model of what the state looks at, their change of 3 students is only 73,000, but for Northborough it's 91,000. If you look at Maynard, they were reduced by 3 students, and but they went up 39,000. So that's why I say if you ask me to try and explain the formula, it's complicated.
Doing some quick math, it kind of works out that Northborough is around $18,200 per student. Southborough is about $18,000,
Right.
3 or something.
But if you tried-
Marlboro's 10,200.
Exactly, so if you
So
tried to
the
apply that
wealthier-
number,
Regulations at all.
yeah.
Yeah, so there is some, I guess the whole point of the minimum local contributions is that the more wealthier municipalities help subsidize the less wealthier to provide that foundation education.
The ability to pay, yep.
Yep.
I don't like it.
That's generally the sentiment that we hear. So that's how, on page 11, so you'll see what the difference there is. Page 12 is what I've been calling the money slide, because this basically is how your assessment is broken down. If you look at the very top, fourth over from the right, you'll see Northborough at the top in blue. That's the minimum local contribution, right, that they're saying that you are required to pay, $1,227,117. The above minimum, this is the above minimum that's required, would be the net busing. So if you look to the far right where it says total, that $583,296 is the difference between what the state is going to provide us at that 80% tuition reimbursement rate. So the difference basically gets split between our 7-member communities, and based on your student enrollment of 6.6, that's the $38,352 that you see there. Our OPEB trust fund, in the past, we were at $35,000. We slowly bumped it to $50,000, and at this time, we're bumping it to $75,000. You'll see Northborough's share of that is $4,931. And then the capital improvement fund.
Just a moment on the
Sure.
OPEB. Do you know what your current estimated liability is?
It's somewhere
for-
around 21 million and some change
Okay.
is our liability, yep. And we figured at 35,000, we'll never get there. So then we bumped it to 50, and now we bumped it to 75, so.
Thank you.
We have, and I think what we have in the trust fund at this time is like $545,000. In some change. I can get you the actual number if you'd like it.
That's good, rough numbers. that's
Okay,
fine.
so if you see the capital improvement fund, that's something that's brand new. As I had mentioned, we had been relying on out-of-district tuition, and we are going to apply some out-of-district tuition in this budget as well. I have a slide to show you, but the $250,000 for capital improvement, Northborough's share of that is $16,438. Now, mind you, if the stabilization fund for some reason doesn't pass, we still have the $250,000 in the budget that we would look to utilize, and we would have to use it in FY25. Obviously, when we get into the stabilization fund discussion, we're looking to build the stabilization fund in order to be preemptive and proactive when it comes to capital improvements in capital equipment. Capital equipment, and I'll talk more about that when we get to it, unless somebody has a question right now. The last thing that I have is long-term debt assessment, and that's the renovation project that the district went underway. It was approved in 2013, it finished in 2016. It was a $62 million project that was approved by our communities. There was a 3-year average enrollment at the time in which the project was approved, in which all of our communities will stay at that percentage. And I have some following slides that will talk about that. But this is the 9th year of debt service payment. Each year it drops $55,000, and Northborough's share this year is $122,348. So the total assessment is $1,409,186 for FY25. And the one thing I will tell you is, so when we look at, and I'm going to give you one of these town budget books, this larger book for you to look through. It's not really what I'm presenting tonight, but you'll see if you go to page 35 and you look at the school profile, which is the breakdown of where your students are and which programs they're in, you're going to see 66 on the student profile, because that's strictly for grades 9 through 12. On this chart, you have either one post-secondary student that's either in Cosmo or LPN, and of course, we don't report that in this budget book. It's an adult. So that's for the 67 students. So page 13 talks more about the debt assessment. The district borrowed $27 million in FY16. It was actually 29. The district decided to take the additional $2 million. We had a ban. The ban was paid off in December. And so the required principal payment was $1.1 million, interest of $657,875. reduction of $55,000 from last year, and then you can see the total that's due on July 1st and January 1. If you flip to the next slide, page 14, you'll see the breakdown fourth from the bottom. Northborough, your 3-year average is a 6.96, and that was at the time of when the project was approved in 2013. It will always stay at that, whether you have a large influx of kids or if their enrollment was to decrease. It'll always be based on that 6.96. So you'll see that there was a reduction of $3,828 from the previous payment. And then on page 15 is the full debt service schedule, and we're at year 9 at this point, and it goes to 25 years. And you can, I think, the administration prior to me was smart that they had a debt schedule that was set in order to allow communities to budget appropriately. So that's the debt schedule. And so page 16 is our operational revenue plan. And this is really how we build our budget based on what kind of revenue we're going to see. And if you look, some of the numbers that we've already gone over, Chapter 78 is at the very top, the $9,832,968. You can see the minimum local contributions, where Northborough is on that, the $1,227,117. We are going to allocate $450,000 of excess and deficiency. That's the ability of the district that can have up to 5% of their operational budget that they could potentially withhold to apply to the next school year's budget to help offset costs. We're going to use $450,000 of that. We are going to allocate $150,000 of interest income, which is $50,000 more than we did in FY24. And then Medicaid reimbursement is a reduction in $5,000. Medicaid reimbursement really is not a stable funding source because it's all based on the students that we service. Based on the needs that they have, we can bill back to Medicaid for some of those needs, but not for all. So as the shifting of enrollment of the students move through the district, that Medicaid reimbursement changes. Okay. The one thing I will say for vocational schools, because we get regional transportation reimbursement, we are not, or do not have the ability to access circuit breaker, which is for special education services. So that's a service, special education funding. If you continue to look down, you'll see there's the regional school reimbursement, that's $760,950 based on the governor's budget number. And then the additional above minimum assessment required, Northborough is the $182,069, and then our total budget number is down there at the bottom, which is $27,425,514,000. That 8.5% increase, and then you can see the what the difference is. Page 17, as I mentioned, we have been offsetting our budget and using out-of-district tuition, but each year that I've come before you over the past 3 or 4 years, we had talked about having less reliance of out-of-district tuition because we're not collecting the money, because we have less out-of-district students. Currently, as I mentioned, we have all in-district freshmen, which means we no longer, or we still get applications. We have 300 seats. We get about 457 in-district applications, and we get about 153 out-of-district applications still. But we, in essence, have not accepted anybody from Shrewsbury or Clinton or other communities. And now, because other vocational schools are in our same situation, they don't have a vocational school to access. But out-of-district tuition in this current year, we had applied $2 million to health insurance and $500,000 on electricity. In FY25 budget, we're applying $1.5 million to health insurance and $200,000 towards electricity. So we will be applying $1.7 million of out-of-district tuition. It's an $800,000 deficit or decrease compared to last year. We see that trend continuing at least for the next couple of years until there's zero out-of-district tuition reliance. Okay? Yeah.
A question, you actually get more applications for in-district than you have slots right now, or at least, right?
Yeah, so when I started in 2015, just real quick, we used to get about 167 applications for, at the time, 275 slots.
Right.
We did some rebranding, asked a bit do more, and kind of focused more on our in-district communities. You know, we're at most of the in-district events. The principal, usually our admissions coordinator and our PR person, as well as some of our school committee members are out there as well, and I get out there as often as I can. And since then, and after we rebranded, we started to see the interest from in-district increase. And so now we've got, enough to fill within district, and then everybody's kind of on a wait list after that.
How do you handle your admissions process? Like, how do you decide, you know, if you have 400 applying for
Who gets in?
300 slots, how do
Yeah.
you?
So there's a
criteria
priority
do-
deadline that they have to submit by January.
Okay,
The way admissions works, real quick, we don't look at grades or attendance. They have to submit a letter of recommendation from any non-family member. They have to come in for a personal interview, so they come in and sit. It's non-graded, non-ranked. Once they do that and they're by the January deadline, they then get put into a pool of applicants from their community. The admissions policy, we look at 3 years of enrollment, the past 3 years of enrollment, and that's basically to determine a minimum seat allotment. Because per town, because what we were afraid of when we went to this minimum criteria lottery, we were concerned that Marlboro and Hudson would basically eat up all the seats, and that the other 5 communities would be left in the dark. And obviously, you've invested in our district, and in order to not do that, we have a minimum allocation. So I don't know what it is off the top of my head for Northborough, but let's just say for the fun of it, it's 20 students. I think it's actually around 20, 20, something like that, maybe. Let's say you get 18 students. Well, the 2 extra seats would be just put into a general pool after they pull all the communities, right? Then we would do a general pool, so anybody that didn't get picked in that first go-around for in-district would then get pulled randomly from the general, and it could be all Marlboro, it could be all Northborough, it could be all Berlin, it could be, one of each. And then what happens is, they do the same for all the towns that way, and then out of district is a totally separate. They get pulled, they get listed, and then when we have folks that don't accept spots, we go to the wait list and then backfill.
okay.
So, yeah.
So, basically then it's the letter of recommendation and the interview are kind of the,
Yeah, so they do that, they get put into lottery. If they're drawn from the lottery, they get a provisional acceptance. And part of the provisional acceptance is for them to write back and say, yes, I want to take the spot.
Okay.
But the final 2 hurdles is that they have to be promoted to the next grade level, and then they can't have any serious disciplinary infractions,
Okay.
which are what we call basically 37H and a half and 37H and 3/4. And so those are felonies or drug-type things or fighting, very severe disciplinary type things. So those are the only things that if they get picked and they get through the lottery, those would be the 2 final things that would.
okay, so actually, if you don't completely screw up the interview kind of thing,
Right.
it's a lottery, so it
Yeah,
literally.
the lottery is the interview is non-ranked and non-graded. It's
Okay.
just an opportunity for our folks to speak to them, let them understand how the schedule works, because we're a
Okay.
week about schedule. It's very similar to almost like a pre-college thing, they come into a whole new campus. They're now doing academics 1 week. They now are going to their technical program the next week. A lot of kids have the misconception that, there's no homework because they have a technical program, when they actually get academic homework during the vocational week. And then even in the technical programs, they do give homework as well, because you need to have consistency. So a lot of students, because of their executive functioning skills, find it difficult, right, to manage that schedule, and they sometimes will go back to their sending communities because it's a little too much. Other kids thrive, and we try to make things relevant and engaging so they understand it. But it really is, it's, as much as I'd love to say everybody wants to go to vocational school, everybody doesn't. It's not for everybody, right? So you really have to have the ability to be flexible like that and have an adjustment in learning.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So does that mean that any out-of-district applicants are just automatically waitlisted unless there's slots above the in-district applicant pool?
Right.
Okay.
Yep, yeah, so what happens is, by the time June rolls around, we get the final grades and all that stuff. We then get calls over the summer saying, hey, I've changed my mind, I'm gonna go to my sending school, that's where all my friends are, and that's fine. What we do is we go to the list, we call the next person, we call the next person and call the next person until we get somebody that says, yep, I'll take it. If for some reason we go through it all completely in district and nobody takes it, then the out-of-district folks then have the opportunity. But other than that, really for out-of-district, it's usually more so in the upper grade levels, a sophomore or a junior. We wouldn't take any transfers past the junior year because for Career Tech Ed, you need to have 2 years in a program to be certified. So generally, unless they're transferring from another vocational school, we wouldn't take them in senior year. So it would be sophomore or junior year that we would see them. And the difficulty with that is the shop that they may want to go in may not have space. So that's the concern. If you don't get in the freshman year, you may have very limited access to what's available in the sophomore, junior year. And then, so the last one is page 18, which is our expenditures by function. And really the two categories, function 1,000, you'll see there's an increase there. 2,000, instruction. That's the 3 positions that we have. Those are the steps and levels and the COLA raises for our teachers that are in that, as well as any kind of other increases. And then under operation and maintenance, that's the other large category, 4,000s. You'll see there's a $500,000 in there. 250 of that is the capital improvement fund. And then the other increase is we have an outdated security and camera system. We also have an outdated phone system. If you can believe it, if I use the word hybrid, it sounds like it's rather new. However, when I say hybrid, it's an analog and, how would I say it? It's not really digital, but it's the old type, basically old school phone system that right now across the state for every public school building, when you call, if you have an emergency, 911 should be able to tell exactly which phone you're calling from, what the location in the building is, and what the address is. That's not available at Aspet right now. So if I have a teacher that calls from any of our places in the building, they have to explain where they're calling from because it doesn't automatically read it because our phone system's too old. So that's part of the other costs of getting that upgraded, looking to go somewhat voice over IP, which is the latest, right, and kind of cloud-based. So the nice thing is most people have cell phones, so if there's an issue and they can't tell where they are and there's an issue getting out, we do it through a cell phone. So it also helps we have an SRO on staff that if it's a real serious emergency, we just call him and then he calls it in over his radio. So any questions on the budget? That's the FY25 budget in a nutshell. All right, great. So quickly, stabilization. I know you were pressed for time. So the creation of the stabilization fund, as I mentioned, ASABET, or if I should say, if you look at the very last page, 21, there's the established city and town stabilization funds for each of our 7 communities. It's got the little chart, and it starts with Berlin. You'll see Northborough right there. This was as of 2022. $4,984,476 in the stabilization fund. As I mentioned, ASABET hadn't gone to our communities except for the renovation project that happened in 2013 over the past 50 years for any type of major capital improvements. Any kind of capital equipment that was purchased for ASABET in that time as well, we've relied on grants. Luckily, the governor, starting with Governor Patrick, through Governor Baker's tenure, and then now with Governor Healy's tenure, we've been lucky that they've been offering what they call workforce skills grants, which are to help for capital equipment costs. We've also had some funding through Perkins, which is the federal funding source that we get for Chapter 74 programs. And usually our equipment is not that cheap. For an example, metal fabrication, we're going to be getting a plasma cutter, a CNC plasma cutter. It's a type of cutting machine of metal that you can program it to do all kinds of different shapes, and that's about $41,000. So luckily, Perkins funding, the state of Mass had some additional money. It then got allocated to the schools based on what you had for enrollment and some other factors. And originally they told us it was about $35,000, then it came back in at like $42,000. So again, pretty lucky that we were able to, access that equipment, and not have to try and take it out of the operational budget. But when you times that times 16 programs, it can get quite expensive, and grants are not sustainable, and neither is the out-of-district tuition, as I mentioned. So the stabilization fund is really, as a regional school district, we don't have access to our member municipality stabilization funds, right? Those are set up for your communities. The regional stabilization fund, Mass General Law, Chapter 71, Section 16, G and a half, allows regional school districts to establish a stabilization fund in which school committees are the governing bodies that make the determination of how those funds are spent for capital projects and capital equipment. And the max percentage that they can have in that stabilization fund is 5% of the operational budget total for that year.
So that's a maximum.
That's the maximum. So if you had a $25 million budget, right, it's $1.25 million that you could have in that stabilization fund. Yes.
I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around the impetus for this. So have you had a time, because you say that grants aren't sustainable, have you had a recent example of a necessary project or an urgent need and
Sure.
you were not able to do it through?
Sure. So the other thing I should say too is we used to fund a lot of these things through out-of-district tuition. So right now, the renovation project to the building was fantastic. We were able to do all the outer envelope for weatherization. We added new HVAC heating systems, boilers, infrastructure sprinklers. We did not have sprinklers throughout the building. They are now throughout the building. And then met all up-to-date fire safety codes. What it didn't do is it didn't deal with the 50-year-old tile floor. That's now popping up because the adhesive is, tired and old and popping. The issue with that is that the 50-year-old tile has potential mastic, which there's asbestos in the mastic. So in order to replace the floor, you have to abate the floor. So the cost of the floor is tripled because it's 2/3 just to abate the floor and get rid of it, and then 1/3 of the cost of actually replacing the floor. On top of that, we have our roadways and parking lots that need to be replaced. Prior to COVID, we had an $800,000, $900,000 estimate. Then it bumped up to about $1.4 million. I haven't gotten a recent estimate, but we still haven't done anything to our roadways and such, and COVID was 4 years ago when we got the last estimate. So we still have to address that. So there are some other things we'd like to, as if there's a potential, and not that this will help this piece, but, is there a potential to expand, services that we can service more students and maybe get some more out-of-district kids in? That would help. We don't want to take away from our member communities' access, but if we could allocate and build. One thing I would tell you is I know if I had come back to the towns with another $50 million project, it's not going to get approved. So what we had done is looking at state funding, tried to look through a project that maybe was modular in nature, but would add 70,000 square feet to the building. That was about an $8.5 million price tag. We didn't get funded for that, so of course we didn't do it. However, if we had a stabilization fund that we then could get a bond or a band or something that could help, a long-term release, or you could have something to put down towards it, that might be potential. If you had capital equipment that we needed to purchase in order to make sure our students stay current, the stabilization fund could be used for that. So those are really the impetuses that we don't no longer have out-of-district tuition money. So we put a turf field in a few years ago. It was about $2.47 million. None of our communities were assessed for that because we were able to pay for it through our out-of-district tuition. So, but the one thing we do with communities, I know Berlin does it, I'm not sure Marlboro may use it. Any of our communities, our police departments, we've been allowing them to use it for their physical and PT tests when their folks have to get recertified. So any chance that we can offer it as a community resource, we do it. But again, as you use that money, the money disappears and you're not collecting any more money into it, right? So it's really for us to be preemptive and proactive. I was at a school district prior to this, and for the longest time, we had a fire chief that would go in, approve the building. It was Minuteman in Lexington. And they had this area called the Trades Hall. And over the years, it was built in the 70s, and they had a very open concept thinking, right? So if you can imagine, when the building first opened, there was just painted lines on the floors that separated the shops. So if you can imagine, carpentry shop from electrical, plumbing shop, HVAC, I can imagine the projectiles being tossed, over the lines. Then they put up fences, then they put up wooden walls, and for the longest time, the fire chief said, just use fire-resistant paint, you'll be fine. Well, then they had a new fire chief come in, and he said, none of this is up to code, it's all gonna be torn out and redone. And nothing, unless it's permanent, because they didn't have sprinklers in that building, it can't be permanent. So what happened with that, and this is why I say we're trying to be preemptive, there was a $453,000 price tag that basically was sent to the 16 communities of Minuteman that they had to pay, because it was a life safety issue, and they needed to operate the building. So it had to be corrected by Monday. This was a Thursday. So basically what they did was they cut the power to that end of the building, so it couldn't be used. And then they had to put the price tag out, they had to get special dispensation for procurement in order to get the contractor to come in and clean the whole thing out. We had to then pay teachers to come in the summer, clear all their shops out. It was a complete nightmare. And so I'm not looking to go through that again. So before we get to that point, and with the impetus of, building the stabilization fund, we're hoping to be proactive. And so, as I mentioned, the governing body would be the school committee. Obviously, for this vote at the town, it's a simple majority, but all we need 2/3 of the community to vote it. What would happen if it would get approved, each year when I come and do the budget presentation, we would have that as one of our slides, that we would talk about the stabilization fund, and we would either show that it's growing, or if there was any action or funding spent out of that, it would be, it was approved by the school committee, here was the vote, and this is what was purchased with that funding. So very similar to what you folks do when you're purchasing fire trucks or things for DPW, that type of stuff. So that's how we would keep it transparent, so you know where that funding is going. So that's all I have for stabilization.
Any additional questions? Thank you very much.
All right, thank
Appreciate the
you.
presentation.
Hope I wasn't too long.
Good.
And what I'll do is I'll leave these with Jason.
Oh, great.
Or I'll leave them here so you can just grab them at your leisure.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Ernie, appreciate
Thank
it.
you for the continued support.
Already changing out the name tags? Excellent. It's great to see you again.
Have a good night.
Take care, thank you.
Okay, I appreciate it.
I'm glad you explained Chapter 70 funding for me.
I know you can.
Actually, it makes your explanation go that much faster.
50 minutes of my presentation, so
That's great. Stabilization funds, all that's covered.
In my head, I'm like, did I say that already? From doing this 7
Yeah.
days.
That's
Good night,
great.
thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, Virginia. So next up, Northborough K-8 schools for the fiscal year 2025 budget presentation.
sure. So thank you for having us this evening, and I'm Greg Martineau, the superintendent, and
I'm Becky Pellegrino, the finance director.
Kelly Gannett, Chair of the School Committee.
we are pleased to present the FY25 School Committee approved budget. The goal really is to share the budget process and what we were trying to accomplish in the final budget for pre-K through 8 Northborough, and answer any questions that you may have. We also provided the town administrator with virtual copies or links to the budget booklet, so hopefully you have that information.
Yes, that was
outlines all
transmitted
the
to us
details.
earlier.
And we are in the process of updating that document as well with the latest documents.
I had a
that we'll be
question on page
presenting.
137.
Thank you
I saw the same
providing-
thing.
Page 137.
Perfect.
But,
We-
yeah, thank
we
you
can
for
save
forwarding
for
that
questions.
ahead of time. That did help
Yeah,
prepare us for the review.
Perfect. So in terms of the budget process, we really think about what we want to accomplish and achieve in terms of with our students. We have excellent teachers, great students, supportive parents, And we really think about what is our mission, and it's really to educate, inspire, and challenge all students, and that really is kind of the mission of the budget. And we also think about what we want to accomplish in terms of preparing students for the next grade level, transition to school, or at the high school, transition to college or career. And we really think about how can we help students become collaborators, critical and creative thinkers, communicators, socially and civically engaged, growth-oriented, and healthy and balanced. And that really drives the budget process. As you all live and are aware, the budget is a process that starts early on in the year. So we usually start in August, and it requires many meetings, a lot of input from faculty, staff, principals, and directors. There's many iterations. There's a partnership with both towns of Northborough and Southborough. And I think it's important that we receive new information, new data around numbers. Numbers become more clear as we move closer to the Springtown meetings, and we adjust accordingly. So at this point in time, the budget that we're presenting this evening includes the governor's budget numbers, and there is some room for change in terms of Chapter 70 state aid that might be an outcome of the final approved budget, which I think would benefit the town of Northborough. And it's hard to believe that it is March 14th and that the town meeting is almost a month away. So, in terms of the school committee's work, the school committee really thinks about budget priorities. It's really important that we set the stage for the year. So the school committee has a meeting where they really talk about what it would like to accomplish. So it identified several budget priorities. One was to recruit, maintain, and support high-quality staff. We are an HR-rich operation. It's the people doing the work. It's essential to the work we do with students. So we also talked about creating a math specialist position at the elementary school, creating health educator positions at the elementary level, reestablishing a strings program, create a K-8 maintenance and grounds position, adding a special education chairperson for the elementary and middle school levels, increasing instructional technology specialists and technology support, launching a world language program, creating 2 assistant principals at the elementary level, and ensuring the district is maximizing current staffing resources. So those were the priorities. Not all of those were accomplished through the budget this evening, but I think it's important to think about what we like to have if money were no object, which we know it is. Also, a budget priority for the school committee was maintaining and improving the district's capital assets, making sure we fund technology replacement cycles for students and staff, improving and maintaining technology assets and infrastructure in classrooms, making sure that we maintain our assets through the facilities capital plan, creating and maintaining outdoor learning spaces, and then identifying sustainability initiatives that through the budget process, it is not only what we need in terms of funding from the town, but also how can we be creative and create efficiencies through, for example, solar. And then lastly, meeting the needs of all learners, making sure that we're within the class size policy the school committee established, and supporting culturally and responsive practices. In terms of budget impacts, each year we try to predict what the impacts will be as we move through the budget process. So what we predicted and what came true are impacts in the areas of supplies and material costs. We're still seeing certain sectors being impacted by inflation, and it is impacting how far a dollar goes in terms of purchasing. Textbooks are in a transition to licensing models. So typically in the past, we would purchase a set of textbooks. Those textbooks would be in service for 7 to 10 years. And then in 7 to 10 years, we would repurchase new textbooks. Now they are changing it to a digital license that is renewed annually. So now we're seeing annual costs to maintain the resources for our students. So it is something that we are building into our budgets. It is not something that we can avoid, and it is an important resource, a curricular resource that we use to educate our students.
So in general, what you mean, this is you're going to a subscription model from a capital purchase model?
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
In terms of total cost, is the electronic subscription model, I mean, is there a reason to do this?
So I think that from a budgeting perspective, it is more consistent.
Right.
So we don't have these peaks and valleys of, we need new science texts and all of a sudden there's a huge expense.
Right.
But it does year over year increase our operational budget and flattens out the peaks and valleys.
Right, and it lowers the capital kind of thing, because you don't need to purchase X.
Exactly. Instructional software, and this is tied to that textbook purchase, it's really considered instructional software. And then lastly, the ESSER phase out. So we were the recipients of ESSER, which is the same as ARPA for the town, and we have until, I think, September 30th to expend ESSER 3. We've tried to be strategic around how we expend the money and not create structural deficits in our budget, but that is challenging. So some of the purchases that we made with ESSER were one-time purchases and a few offsets, and now we have to put those offsets back onto the operational.
Sorry, just one more
Sure,
question
sure.
about the
Yeah.
subscription model. One of the problems when you buy a textbook every 7 years, by the time you get to year 7, the information in the textbook's 7 years out of date. Is the subscription model kind of?
It helps maintain and keep our resources
keep
current.
current.
Exactly.
Okay, all right.
So if something happens in terms of, for current events, for example, it's automatically updated. Or if some new learning in science happens, those are updated. So it is a benefit.
And I think that the print books are not available as much, too.
Yeah,
The resources
most
aren't.
publishers are moving away.
They're
from
moving away
textbooks.
from it, so.
Or
The industry's moving in
Yeah.
this direction. It's not as if
So,
you need to be on the front end or the back end, but it's happening.
it's.
I was about to ask if any school district that you're aware of is still using the old, buy these textbooks have these big stacks of books every, 7, 10 years.
I think depending on the level, middle school and high school level, there are situations where that does happen. It's rare. As a district, we are moving away from that. And I think oftentimes what we're hearing now, we're seeing is that, we'll give you the textbooks for free, but you have to pay for the digital license.
Right, sure.
Or you have to buy the textbooks and we'll give you the digital license for free. But it ends up that we are having to subscribe annually to these tools and resources. So the next slide speaks to the ESSER 3 FY24 expenses. So what we purchased with ESSER, and again, we tried to be very mindful of trying not to create structural deficits, but the result is we used $172,155 of ESSER funds in FY24 to offset the FY24 budget, and now we're having to make sure those are back onto the operational budget. So that has been a minor impact, but an impact.
And was that ESSER Phase 3 the last phase?
Yeah.
I mean, that is the,
It is fully expended already, so.
okay, thank you.
The next slide really speaks to the budget process from the initial budget requests that are submitted to the finance department from directors and principals, to the preliminary budget, to tonight, the school committee approved budget. And it does speak to the process, and you'll see the initial budget requests in October. The initial requests summed to $31,409,816. And again, what we try to do with our leadership team is really thinking about, if money was not an obstacle, what would we want to ask for? Well knowing that that's not realistic, but we don't want financial constraints to not allow our principals and our district leaders to think about what could be. But from that initial request, you can see the school committee approved budget, which is $29,119,597, is much less than the initial budget requests. and it is a 3.99% increase over fiscal year '24. The next slide, part of that, the work that we do is really thinking about what positions we would like. So this is a list of positions that were discussed and advocated for during the budget process. The positions that are in, the rows that are in green are the positions that are included in this FY25 budget. So you can see that we are creating math interventionists, and also we have included funding to reestablish a strings program, and we're really working on the details on the strings program, and our goal is to start at the middle school and then eventually have the strings program start in 3rd grade and have a parallel musical experience for students in Northborough that Southborough students are getting. So this budget steps toward that goal. And the other positions that you see, although are important, again, are not included in this budget. The next slide are additional proposed positions, and again, green are positions that are included in the FY25 budget. So you'll see an adaptive physical education teacher. So we have an adaptive PE teacher who is currently a .8 shared across our 3 districts. We are making that person full-time, and Northborough's share of that .2 increase of that person's position is .08. We are adding 2 educational support professionals, so each year we look at our student support and student needs and IEPs. So these 2 positions will add the positions necessary to make sure that students on IEPs are getting what they need. And then a special education teacher, so we have a CASEL program in our elementary schools, and this is adding an additional teacher to meet the needs of our CASEL program. So overall, through the budget process, there were 24.78 FTEs requested, and again, we were well aware that was not going to be something that we could accomplish in this budget cycle. But what we are doing is we are creating a 5-year plan, a roadmap, so that, you know, what are our priorities in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5, so we can work toward achieving, adding some of these positions in a way that is fiscally responsible.
Is that something where as current personnel in one discipline retires, you reevaluate, you need to replace in that same discipline or move to one of these new?
Correct. Oftentimes through attrition too, so we'll have someone who has been in our district for 35 years and is at the highest pay level, and then when that person retires, then the person coming in is not starting at that level.
Yeah.
So there's a differential, and then we look at that differential, and over several hires it adds up, and
Yeah.
thinking about how we can add positions in the most cost-effective way.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
The next slide is significant budget offsets. So there are 3 significant budget offsets. The first is circuit breaker special education reimbursement. So we get reimbursed for students who are out of district, who we cannot meet their needs in district because of the severity of their needs. So that is a significant cost to the district, and the state has a circuit breaker to offset towns' costs to that. So that is a little over $1 million that we apply to the FY25 budget. We also get circuit breaker for special education transportation reimbursement to offset the costs of transportation for students who receive special education. That's a little under $170,000. And then each year we look at retirements and leave of absences. So again, looking through attrition, we look to add positions, also to moderate any significant budget increases that we see. So in this budget, due to retirements and leave of absences, there's a budget offset of a little over $250,000. So the total budget offsets total $1,482,033.
How much do the circuit breaker offsets compare to the actual cost, the percentage of that's reimbursed or returned?
The district is responsible for $50,000. Approximately, it's 4 times the foundation, student foundation, so it's about $50,000. And then it's it can range, but it's about 80% of any cost above 50,000.
Above the 50, okay.
And that can vary depending on the state level budget. So it is significant, but it's that $40,000 to $50,000 payment, and then it's we're responsible for 20%. So we have, we have a out-of-district placement that is $750,000 to educate that student. So 50,000, and then 20% of that 750 is paid.
140,000?
So it adds up quickly, but it is appreciated, and it does help in terms of legislative priorities. It is to make sure that circuit breaker is funded to the full extent.
That's pretty much one of our repeating
Yes,
legislative
it's a common theme.
priorities, right?
Anything you want to add there? So the FY25 approved budget is $29,119,597, and it is a $1,118,370 increase over fiscal year 25, which represents a 3.99% increase over FY24. And the next slide is, what are some of the instructional materials included in the budget? This is where you will see some of the increased costs as a result of licensing models for curriculum resources. So Wit and Wisdom digital license, K through 5, we implemented a new ELA curriculum, K through 5 this year, and then the digital licenses annually will be about $8,000. This budget also includes funding for a middle school ELA curriculum, so we implemented a curriculum in pre-K through 5. This will implement curriculum 6 through 8, so that is a $67,000 addition to the budget. Also, Envision and ST Math K-5, that's just renewing our licenses for our curriculum for mathematics. And then we have resources for middle school social studies and science curriculum, licenses for second step, and our social emotional learning curriculum K through 8, middle school math curriculum, and then student and staff devices. And again, this was offset by ESSER last year. Now we're placing it back on the budget. The next slide, other materials included in the budget. So we do have, originally we thought a health or a math educator. Through conversations with the district leadership team, principals thought it was really important to have more math support. So this will be more additional math support to our opportunities for students. This includes a special education teacher for the CASEL program, NESP. The ELA coordinator, a portion of the ELA coordinator, which is a shared position between Northborough and Southborough, we funded through ESSER, so this is putting her salary back on to the operational budget. Spoke about the middle school strings and instruments, $50,000. The human resource information system, we're trying to be more efficient, so we have about 800 employees across our 3 districts. We are going to be implementing HRIS system, which will make our employee management much easier. Sharing information, collecting information will be all electronic. The $7,011 is Northborough's 40% of the overall cost. 30% will be shared with the region, 30% will be shared with Southborough.
I thought that the math educator is going to be 4 FTEs, so.
So the conversation that originally was, we started with 4 FTEs. Now we're talking about interventionists, and now we're talking about 2 interventionists split between each paired with 2 elementary schools.
Okay.
And then the last slide is historical budget increases compared to inflation. I think it's You know, if you look at, you know, past budgets from FY18 to FY25, you can see the pandemic. I think all department budgets were impacted in Northborough as well as the region. In FY22, we brought in a very modest budget increase. And then at FY24, it was one of the larger budget increases that we requested in the past 5 or 6 years. And now we're seeing the budget requests moderate. We try to be mindful that, you know, we are one department of many in the town of Northborough, and we are also the largest department in terms of dollar. So we try to be mindful of that impact. And I think our approach is to be stable and consistent over time and not have peaks and valleys. That, you know, we have been able to improve our programs, add programs with this model. And, you know, so this budget continues that philosophy and that approach. And we would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Have you any significant changes due to the people housed in temporary housing who undoubtedly have children? Are the children enrolled in school?
Yes, so.
Believe me, I think they should be.
Yes, so we enrolled, I believe, 16 students in the fall to Northborough Public Schools in the region. So I believe we had about 9 or 10 elementary school students, an middle school. Do you have the exact number?
10 elementary and middle school students and 6 at the high school.
So we, you know, we were strategic in where we made sure we kept the students together. So we had students at Z, created a little cohort. We had students in Milliken and Algonquin. We were receiving additional funding as a result of educating students, so we were using that money that was $104 a day.
A day per student.
Per student. They have done really well in our system. Our educators have done an amazing job. The parents have been very engaged in the process. And we are in the process now of, and I'm sure you all are aware, that the state is regionalizing and trying to use its resources more efficiently. So many of our families moved to Auburn, but the students chose to continue to attend our public schools. So they're being transported. And then I believe all of the families, from what we know as of May or June, all of the families will need to be placed in permanent housing, which will impact whether they attend the Northborough schools. But it's been, you know, it's through the community support and our amazing teachers and educators, it's been a very positive experience.
Did they were they fluent in English, is what I should say?
So we also received money we hired an additional ELD teacher to support the students. So we were able to add capacity, and that person has been working and helping. Not all were fluent when they arrived, but have made great gains.
In past years, in addition to the budget information, you provided, you know, enrollment information, how the schools are doing and stuff. None of that's here this year.
It's
is that available?
Yes, so I will share the link with Scott to the budget book.
Okay, yeah.
And then, and if you would like a hard copy of the budget book, if you email me, I can also make sure
Yeah,
Tim gets.
I remember when I scanned through the budget book, there's enrollment projections.
Right.
There. Okay, yeah, so I think it's in the package, and we'll retransmit that.
And I can speak to enrollment in kind of general terms. So I think that when we look at our enrollment projections, our pre-K to 8 enrollment over the past 10 years has declined about 10%, which was projected. So right now we are in the valley of enrollment, and then over the next 10 years, we'll see an increase of 10%. So if you look at our enrollment, it's a V, and now we're climbing. So I think it's predictable. The enrollment over the next 10 years is steady. And obviously, you know, being an MBTA adjacent community could impact that. So it's something,
Okay.
something we
Well,
are,
if that happens,
so if we are keeping in a close eye on that to see if that could impact enrollment in our schools.
Scott?
Yeah.
Is this the school committee's approved budget?
This is,
Thank you.
yeah.
Is there modeling that you do then from even a facilities perspective, let's say, in terms of physical capacity, staffing capacity and all that, then to look at how those enrollments then map to what the future needs are going to be?
Yes, so we look at the current assets that we have in terms of building space and what's the maximum capacity and what's the impact of programming. So obviously, we could take classrooms from music, art, but, you know, it really impacts programming. I would share that with the town of Northborough being invited into the Mass School Building Authority eligibility phase, it's a great opportunity for the community to really think about what is future enrollment going to look like and what space will be needed. And it does take into consideration mobility, so families who are selling homes and people moving in. It also takes into account birth rates and looks at any future projects that could come to fruition that would impact enrollment. So I think our space now is our space. You know, we can't grow it anymore. And I think this eligibility phase will give the community an opportunity to think about, you know, what does the next generation of school facility look like for the town? And how does that align with potential enrollment increases?
So I bet those requirements would then weigh heavily on the feasibility study for Beasley,
It
right?
does. So eligibility
That
is looking at current enrollment, and then we enter feasibility, and then feasibility is really diving in.
Yeah, okay, great. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much for that phase. Now you have to put your other hats on. We'll switch to the Algonquin
The
Regional
next
budget.
superintendent's much more engaging.
I like that guy better, yeah.
So I will not speak to kind of the mission and vision and what we're
It's
trying
glad to see that
achieve.
it's the same.
It is.
They're very similar, very similar.
And it is consistent across Northborough, South, and the region, and that is by design. But in terms of the regional school committee budget priorities, it too takes the time to really think about what it would like to accomplish. So the regional school committee selected empowering learners, making sure that we fund the recommended curriculum replacement cycles and explore alternative curriculum cost models. So again, many of our resources at Algonquin are textbook-based, and really thinking about what's the next generation of curriculum and how do we shift in that direction. Equity of opportunity, so really thinking about how can we expand experiential learning opportunities for juniors and seniors. We added a position in the FY24 budget to add a career coordinator, and do you know the exact name of the title?
It's my neighbor.
Yeah, so we've hired a person to really think about making business connections, networking, and providing more opportunities for students to have experiential learning opportunities. So if a student is interested in, you know, working as an engineer, seeking out engineers and providing work-study opportunities and really having students gain experiences. She's also working on trying to find employment opportunities for students over the summer, not just working at Almond's Ice Cream, but real kind of opportunities to learn about different careers and, you know, and gain some experience. So we're very excited about her work, and we think that I think we'll be able to really provide students with a lot of opportunities as they enter their junior and senior year that will help them explore different careers and opportunities to help them be more informed as they as they become adults and citizens. Healthy and balanced learners to prioritize social, emotional, and physical well-being of students. So this is always a goal for the school committee. It's something that we work hard at, and it's not something that you're ever done focusing on. So again, making improvements to how we support our students. And then the other is creating a special education team chairperson. And then in terms of finance and operations to support teaching and learning, really seeking to achieve net zero and expand the solar array on Algonquin's rooftop. Currently we have one solar array, and this would expand it so we would have, I believe, 70% of our energy from a renewable source. Algonquin's energy would be 70% from a renewable source, which is pretty exciting. Our goal is to get to 100%. And then create and fund a stabilization fund, and I can speak to that later on in the presentation. And then we're very fortunate to have both communities, Northborough and Southborough, support a new athletic complex. So we are in the process of really looking at how do we create a fund for the long-term maintenance of that complex, so that in 10 years we have an endowment that we can say, okay, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and we've thought that through. So we are developing a plan, and that will include sponsorships and donations, rentals, and really think about, how can we support that facility while not burdening the taxpayers of future costs. And then lastly, sustainable contribution to the OPEB unfunded liability. So as you are aware, the region is like its own entity, its own town, so we are responsible for all other post-employment benefits, and something that we are trying to keep in mind as we look at what that liability is and how do we create a sustainable funding source for that. The other thing I'll just mention that each fall we do provide the select board and the town administrator and boards and committees with kind of our snapshot of what we think will come to fruition in the upcoming budget year. So when we started the budget cycle, we thought that we would see about a 4.5 increase in the overall budget for Algonquin. We predicted that we wouldn't really see any additional Chapter 70 aid. So far in the governor's budget, that is coming true. We predicted that health insurance costs would increase between 7 to 10%. We just learned this week, or last week, that it's a 7.9% increase. So our projections were at 10%, so that has been helpful in terms of the budget process. It was not a 10% increase. We were concerned about transportation costs. We have a 3-year contract with our current bus contractor with an ability to renew for 2 additional years. So we are in the 4th year of that contract, and we have the ability to renew for next year. We were thinking about testing the market, but all data sources indicated that people were seeing anywhere between a 25 to 35% increase on transportation contracts. So we knew what our rate was for next year, and that was under 4%.
It's 2%.
2%. So it was something we couldn't not enter into. And then we were predicting out of district special education costs would increase by 7%. And then in terms of assessments, our predictions were Northborough's assessment would be about a 5% increase, and Southborough's would be a 4%. So this is an opportunity to just talk about the great work our finance department does in terms of financial modeling and projecting. As Superintendent Houle mentioned, the funding formulas are complex, but there are ways to kind of project and forecast what the impact will be. So this is just an opportunity. As we move through this presentation, you'll see that most of our projections were spot on. And Jason knows the education foundation, the budget, or the formula is complicated. But I think Becky and I have, we're pretty
Can I
good.
make one comment
Sure.
to the chair? Just, we've gone over that formula a number of times, and, you know, with the previous superintendents as well, and I think we even had officials from the Department of Ed here to work with some of the Appropriations Committee members to explain the formula.
I think that meeting, we all left with,
But it's tremendously enrollment driven, because the formulas seem to play out that Northborough and Southboroughs are pretty equivalent under that formula when it comes out to per pupil costs. So really what's going on with the assessments is basically purely, not purely because there's a formula behind it, but I'm misspeaking by saying it's purely enrollment driven, but it is driven heavily by enrollment.
it is a factor, and any slight percentage increase or decrease to enrollment can have a, you know, a disparate impact to a community. So, you know, we do have a slide that shows the assessment increases over the year, and you'll see that some years it's to Northborough's advantage, some years it's to Southborough, but it's peaks and valleys. I think of the last couple years, it's pretty consistent between Northborough and Southborough, which is a good place to be, but not because we're exercising any mechanism behind the scenes.
There's no discretion, right, in applying the formula to the different
formula is
attributes.
the formula.
It is
Enrollment
what it
is the
is,
enrollment.
right? It's math.
Right, there's no way to really game the formula.
Right.
The formula is the formula, and it basically looks at Northborough and Southborough as being relatively equivalent in terms of being able to afford the education that the town's providing to the students. So there is one factor, and I think we've found this is like the 8th grade graduation rate, that when we look at enrollments in 8th grade from Northborough, there's almost 100%, and I think there was one year there was 101%, so that means we gained a student or two over the summer, whereas Southborough has a lower rate of kids that go from 8th grade to the high school. So that's just was one unpredictable thing in some of our modeling that we did in the past.
You know, we do try to, you know, we get as much data as we can in terms of 8th graders' plans, and usually we have a sense of they're asking for recommendations or they're applying to ASABET. So we do have a sense, but it is something that can fluctuate from year to year. But we are seeing that Southborough's 8th graders enrolling at Algonquin is at a higher percentage than in prior years, which again is helpful and I think a good sign in terms of that Algonquin's a great place, high quality education, and I think citizens are seeing the value in that. So some of the similar budget impacts that we saw at the pre-K to 8 budget were also impacts to the FY25 budget. Special education out-of-district tuition, again, can fluctuate from year to year depending on the caseload and the student's needs. Several years we might have students who are aging out from our district, and then depending on students who are aging into at the Algonquin can impact the overall out-of-district tuition. And if a student unexpectedly moves into the district, that is another factor that is difficult to predict and does have an impact. Special education transportation, so we are seeing great volatility in the special education transportation sectors. So special education transportation for students who take vans or need other forms of transportation has gone up significantly, and we're seeing that across our neighboring communities and other towns across Central Mass. So it is something that we're keeping an eye on. We do partner with Assabet Valley Collaborative. They procure transportation for its member districts. So we partnered with Assabet Valley Collaborative as it procured transportation this year for FY25.
Okay.
And we're in a good place. Insurance costs, so not only health insurance but also liability and workers' compensation is something that can be volatile. And lastly, ESSER phase out, the same situation at the regional level that we had at the pre-K through 8 level. And In terms of ESSER expenses for FY '24, again, these expenses need to move back onto the FY '25 budget. Student staff devices, part of ESSER 3 funding was also to account for any learning loss, so we did fund a tutor position. And then translations, we are, translation is an important part of the work we do for many of our families and students. And we are seeing increased costs and increased demand for translation. So that is something that we have to build back into the FY '25 budget. The next slide is the budget process, so similar process to the pre-K through 8. And as you can see from initial budget requests to school committee approved budget, there's a significant difference. And the school committee approved budget is $27,871,426, or a 4.82% increase over fiscal year '24. Proposed positions, so similar to pre-K through 8, we spend time talking about what positions would enhance student experience. So on the table, we see the rows in green are the positions that are included in this FY '25 budget. Anything not in green has not been added. So similar to the proposed budget, the .06 is the region's portion of the .2 adaptive PE increase. Educational support professionals, again, to meet the needs of students. And then a speech and language pathologist, so this is currently a .8 position, we're making this a full-time position. And then varsity assistant coaches. So this has been a request from the regional committee for many years. So the committee had many conversations around which of these positions would have a positive impact on the student experience. Although not in the classroom, adding varsity assistant coaches to girls volleyball, field hockey, girls tennis, boys volleyball, and boys tennis is really important. Not because it's just another adult to connect with the players on that team and to provide guidance and support, help coach. And it really is around one more adult who can make connections with students is really important. So of the 3.36 positions, again, we are, it's .06, a 1.0, and a .20. So it's a 1.26. The next slide, budget offsets. Circuit breaker tuition reimbursement, circuit breaker transportation reimbursement, and then FY '25 circuit breaker tuition reimbursement of $100,000. So last year, the out-of-district tuition placements increased their rates by 14%, and which was a significant increase. So I think it impacted both communities, pre-K through 8 Northborough and the region, by about $250,000 each because of that 14% increase. What the governor did in the supplemental budget bill was to mitigate some of those impacts and increased some of that reimbursement money. So we are seeing that money as part of that reimbursement. So that will be applied to the FY '25 budget.
One question on the assistant coaches, that's strictly just the cash, and that's the only expense for the school system?
Correct.
There's no
Correct, no
benefits of
benefits.
any? Okay, thank you.
So the offsets total a little more than $780,000. And then budget increases, so the next slide really speaks to what are some of the increases to the FY '25 budget. You'll see that tech infrastructure and maintenance, Worcester Regional Retirement System, special out-of-district transportation. So again, this is that increase you're seeing in the transportation sector. Transportation, so that's the 2% on the current contract. Maintenance of buildings and classroom instructional technology. Again, we funded classroom technology out of ESSER, and this is moving it back onto the operational budget. So that totals a little more than $400,000. And then the next two slides really speak to kind of the work that we did to fine-tune our budget to get to a school committee approved budget. We look at, like the town, we get better data and more information. We're able to fine-tune our budget. So circuit breaker tuition reimbursement, special education adjustments, transportation adjustments, insurance and retirement system adjustments. So we were able to have a little under $2 million of reductions as a result of better data and more information about what the numbers actually are. And lastly, the approved budget. So again, the FY25 budget totals $27,871,426. It's an increase of $1,281,080 over FY24, which represents a 4.82% increase. Next slide again compares it to inflation and budget requests over the past since FY20. Similar story to the pre-K through 8 historical budget data, but you'll see that this budget request is the highest request in the past 5 years. And the next slides, I'll have Becky speak to them.
So the next slides really break down for you how we calculate your assessment. So you can see that we have used the governor's number for the Chapter 70, and that was an increase of just about $30,000 over FY24. That number really does fluctuate though throughout the budget process, but at least we feel as though that is a good starting point. We have used the FY24 regional transportation number only because the FY25 governor's budget number did look higher. And that number again really fluctuates, and so there's some concern with having too high a number, so we did go more conservative with that figure. But again, you know, once the budget plays out at the state level, that is something that we will be adjusting. And then we've factored in approximately $20,000 in revenues, miscellaneous revenues. So when we take our total budget that Greg had just mentioned of $27,871,000, we do subtract out those figures to come out with what the FY25 budget would be. That would then be appropriated to the two communities. So that is $23,657,759. And then this is where those minimum local contributions for both communities come into play. You can see that Northborough's was $8,275,404. That's just about $117,000 more than FY24. And then Southborough's was $5.2 million, and their increase was about $30,000 from last year. So once we subtract out those minimum local contributions, that's where we come to the $10,172,000. And that is what would then be divided by, or rather apportioned based on the October 1st, 2023 enrollments. And so the next page really does.
Before we go to the next slide, Becky, what's, in terms of the state budgeting process, what's like the next milestone that will get additional information?
The next would then be coming from the House, where we would have their, and I don't think I have not seen those numbers or a date yet for when they're releasing those numbers. And then after that would be the Senate, and then they would need to work in committee to come up with a final number to present to the governor.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't recall what the next steps
and
were.
generally it's happening, I don't know, I think last year it might have been a little earlier, where it was the beginning of July where they finally finalized things,
Yeah,
but.
we usually find out the final, this is the same state aid process that we rely on for the revenue in the town budget. So that process, the numbers change, every iteration of them, they change, and generally we don't get the final number until the summer sometime,
Yep.
generally beginning of July.
Yes.
And the good news for the school budget and the aid the school receives is usually the governor's budget is the floor, and then
Yeah, and then
it's
small
the
increases on
incremental
top of that.
increases. That's been the past case, but I'll knock on wood.
Thank you.
So the next slide just shows how that 10 million is then apportioned to the two communities. You can see that Northborough's portion is 61.54% and Southborough's is 38.46. And again, those numbers are based on the enrollment at Algonquin as of October 1st of 2023. And so that is broken down. You can see Northborough's portion is 6 million. And then we add the minimum local contribution to that to come up with a total of $14,535,274. As a comparison to the FY24 assessment, last year it was $13,421,000. So it is a difference of just over $1 million from last year, and which would represent an 8.3% increase over FY24. But the school committee did vote to utilize $675,000 in their excess and deficiency. So Northborough's portion of that $675 would be an offset of $415,395. So if we were to take your apportionment and subtract out the E&D portion, your final assessment is $14,119,879, which represents a 5.21% increase.
Thanks to the school committee for
Yes.
that, applying the E&D. That helps a little bit.
Yeah, and I also want to comment that the school committee does have a excess and deficiency policy. So that policy speaks to kind of the floor that it is willing to let its E&D reserve fund fall to. So applying $675,000 still is within the range of the school committee's policy. And I think the school committee, the only tool that the school committee really has to impact assessments is really that E&D funding.
Right.
And then the next slide, so this year, what the regional school committee has done is they have voted for a capital assessment as well. There are a number of projects that need to take place at the high school, and so we have come up with a figure of $391,000. You'll notice that the apportionment rate is different than what you saw on the previous slide, and that's because with capital and with debt assessments, we take the average of the October 1st numbers for the prior 4 years. So Northborough's portion of that capital assessment is 61.91%, and Southborough's is 38.09%. So Northborough would be responsible for $242,077 of that capital assessment. Your projected overall assessment, which includes all the debt for the renovation and also for the athletic facility, is $15,193,847, and this capital project of $242,000 is 1.59% of that total assessment.
And I'll just comment that Algonquin Regional High School is the largest asset for both communities, Northborough and Southborough. It's 350,000 square feet. It is a large campus, and what the school committee has asked us to do is look at the capital plan for the next 5 years and come up with a significant investment to accomplish achieving many of those projects in the capital plan. So the plan is about a $400,000 investment over the next 5 years will accomplish many of the items that are listed on that plan.
So we can expect kind of on the order
Yeah, I
of
think-
400,000 each year for.
Correct. I think that that we've not requested funding for capital projects at Algonquin in many years.
Yeah.
And now it's, the facility now it's not a new facility. The renovation project will be paid off in 2027. So as that debt assessment falls off for both communities, it's really looking at what will it take to maintain the facility in good condition. So we're trying to balance when debt falls off, how we can incrementally add capital projects and sustain the facility.
Maybe just a follow-up question on that. So then the debt on the athletic complex, that will projected to start which year?
26, 27?
So what we've done is we've issued bond anticipation notes for the work that's been done so far. So right now, in FY '25 and '26, we will be paying interest only on those bands.
Yep.
And then we'll go out for permanent financing in fiscal year '27, which will mean there'll be 1 year where there will be both the debt assessment for the renovation project as well as the athletic facility. But then the renovation will drop off in FY '28,
So just that overlap on
just for
27.
1 year.
Do I have it right in my head? I'm thinking on the order of $120 impact average single family for the renovation, and then the complex is about $60? Is that even in the ballpark? Does that sound right?
Yeah, we'd have to look. I know we did do the calculations for the athletic
And
complex.
I just have in my mind that, you know, the community's accustomed to 120 or whatever it is. And had that overlap not happen, we would have seen kind of like half of that to continue for the athletic complex. So it's just, that's how I've been rationalizing it, or the mental map there is just that one overlap year.
By order of magnitude, it's like, I think the ad ren project's debt assessment's about $645,000 a year, and then the high year is about $470 something for when you issue bonds for the athletic complex. So there will be 1 year where we're paying $645 plus the $478 together, but then it's gonna go from $645 a year down to $478. But going back into ancient history, we used to have that lawsuit settlement that was applied against the $645.
right.
So there's been jumps, it hasn't been a consistent amount, even though it's been level debt for a number of years.
Yeah, okay.
And then what we hope to accomplish with the capital projects, we have a redundant domestic hot water boiler. These are all very exciting. Boiler, blower motor, glycol, and the heating loop, lighting controls, and then above the guidance wing, we have a failed HVAC unit. So those total about $391,000.
I'm accustomed to using vitriolic in a
Vitriol, yes.
different meaning.
Vitriol. I didn't even know that. So, again, we appreciate the partnership with the town of Northborough, the support of the taxpayers and citizens, and for the most part, this is a level services budget with a few areas of incremental growth. It really sustains the high-quality instructional experience that students receive at Algonquin.
On the capital projects, are these your estimates, or have you already gone out for bids?
We haven't gone out for bids. We've worked with our vendors to get updated estimates. These are estimates at this point.
Any questions before we switch to stabilization?
I have one question about the transportation, just because I know the special education out of district, that's a really big price tag. I was just curious as to the percentage of our student population that we're sending out of district and paying that hefty price tag for transportation, if you know it. If you don't, we can.
No, we do have a spreadsheet. It's about 20 kids? 20 plus?
Yeah, I would say so the transportation is not just out of district, it's also students who are within the district who require the transportation from their homes to Algonquin
Oh,
as well.
Like
So there-
vans,
Yeah,
like
so there could be.
people,
Like the van pool, like
van
that.
pool,
Yes,
things like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Okay.
But I would say, we do have a spreadsheet. I would say it's probably about 20 to 25 students.
Okay. And so the transportation line, I'm looking at this page here. So the transportation line is, when you say the special ed above that, out-of-district transportation, that does include some in-district students.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so that's the total of
Yep.
all, okay.
Yep.
So if you look at the line item budget, it's a regular education budget and fund codes, and then special education budget and fund codes. So in the regular ed, you'll see transportation, which is the yellow buses.
Right.
In the special education budget, you'll see transportation, that is,
Everything else.
this is this.
Right.
And you'll see that the transportation in special education is significantly more than our yellow bus transportation. It costs more for less students because of the needs of the students, obviously.
Right, right, okay, thank you. Excellent.
So stabilization, I can just speak to it very briefly. So in 2018, we did bring forth to the both towns, Southborough and Northborough, the creation of a capital stabilization fund. In order for us to create a capital stabilization fund, it has to be approved in both communities. It was approved in Northborough in 2018. It was not approved in Southborough. This year, we are moving it forward as a warrant article in Southborough to see if they will approve it. If they will approve it, then we will have a mechanism to create a stabilization fund. In preparation, we have created a stabilization fund policy, so that we have a clear policy around what it's to be used for, what the ceiling is for the amount in that account. We're hoping that provides some assurity to the citizens in Southborough that this is an important fund to create. And again, this is a 350,000 square foot building. We need a place where if something happens, if there's an emergency, that we have a place, a stabilization fund to fix. And we also, we can use it for smaller capital projects, repairs, but $400,000 for a 350,000 square foot building it's a small amount, and that's what we're hoping to keep in that account.
And similar to Assabet, then you're thinking on the order of $400,000 capital plan and a $400,000 stabilization.
Yeah, and our policy speaks to it's not a savings account. Like, we're not saving for some big project that, we're gonna be expending this,
The goal is, the purpose is to use
and
that for
and any
those.
larger capital project will come before the committees and boards for approval and then voted by the citizens.
And the school committee policy does say that there would be a targeted range of 1% to 2.5% of the district's operating budget. So again, that just speaks to the maximum that we would have in that account.
Excellent.
And again, we do have our budget booklets, so I will make sure that email those links directly to members, and that has all of the budget detail, backup documents, academic achievements, strategic plan. It's a pretty thorough document. And if you have any questions as you read through that document, you can always reach out. We'd be happy to answer them.
That's great. That's been something we've had to take advantage of in this more compressed schedule, is that trying to do as much preparation as we can before your presentation, and then follow-up comments will continue to funnel through Jason and get that out to you, then the rest of the committee. Any other comments for school administration? Excellent. Always clear and informative. Thank you.
Thank you for your time and your work.
Good stuff.
And your support.
Well, that's to be, we'll have to. And we won't stay to see what you're.
No,
We'll let
thank
go.
you for opening the window. Yeah, I'm tempted. How are you doing over on this side of the room? Do we need to open this window as well?
So
Are
what-
you temperature okay for you?
I think it's great now, yeah.
Okay. It's getting kind of unbearable. All right.
What else we got to do?
Yeah, town budget update?
Yeah, so Scott, I was gonna hand out just an example of last year's report that
Oh,
we're
okay.
trying to.
Oh, when we're
at the
talking
end,
about
just
the-
get to a report that's gonna go in the town meeting booklet, and this body will have to vote recommendations on all the financial articles, including the town budget and so forth. But here I have last year's printed out, so we can take a look at that and discuss updating it. So hand these out. Trip on my own cord. That's why I sat over here
Thank
tonight,
you.
so I wouldn't trip on a cord. Yeah, it's just.
Thank you. Thank you.
How come Northborough is always one that is paying more money?
We're a relatively high-income
Compared to Southborough?
compared to not compared to Southborough. I mean, you'll see that their assessments or their proportions are slightly above us,
Yeah.
Just barely.
just barely. yeah.
So if you.
I think it's enrollment though, right?
Well,
No,
so.
I'm talking about,
If you do it like per pupil,
Oh, per student, okay.
yeah, that one Assabet table, you can do the division pretty easily and see the spreads per town.
But if you back into the minimum contribution at the 61.54%, that's follows pretty closely. It's not exact. I think Southborough's comes out like a little bit more per student if you divide it by per student. But that's why I say I would be misspeaking to say that it's 100% enrollment driven, but it's very heavily enrollment
Heavily,
driven in
yeah.
that formula. So it's mostly,
Percent or?
yeah, it's pretty close to that.
But when I
90%.
did the division on minimum local for Assabet, Southborough pays $200 more per student in their minimum local than we do. So they're slightly. And if you look at this, as we look in this budget update, the table where it shows tax effort, now that I understand that column, you see that average income in Southborough is that much higher than us, so that factors into that complex formula for apportioning or computing the minimum local.
Well, I do appreciate how much the school committee and the superintendent's office pare down that budget in their budget process.
And that's,
make it
and that is
workable.
their standard and is part of their approach, as the superintendent said, right? He wants to hear what the needs are, and in going through that process, you also get those needs costed out. So it's actually a budgeting or a costing exercise, an estimation exercise. And then with that information, either the administration or going through the school committees then look at what has the most value for price and make their recommendations. It's a very good process.
it seems that this year we have a larger request than normal for more employees.
That is true, and we'll see there's a slide dedicated to that in the budget update package.
I don't know how you want to handle this. I just wanted to
Let's
mention briefly the
Yeah, let's
last
talk
year's
about the report,
So
because
at
that's
the
something
end of
that's
this,
calendar-driven that we've got to be
we-
prepared for.
we need to look at the schedule at some point and decide when the votes will be taken among this body for recommendations of articles. That, I think this is clearly just last year's report, not anything drafted toward this year, but we can work on putting together a draft for your next meeting that will be obviously blank for votes, but we'll just have the information in it built out as a template. Just by way of history, going back to last year, March 27th was, I just looked at the calendar, was the joint, because I don't remember what I had for breakfast this morning, but March 27th was the select board's joint hearing on the budget last year, and the meeting where this body met to vote their recommendations was the 29th. So we don't necessarily need to have the votes in place before the select board's joint hearing with this body and the select board to hear about the budget. So The town budget update, this is simply the presentation. I gave this.
Oh, sorry, let me finish on the report then. So what we have on our proposed meeting schedule is then finalizing our report on the meeting of the 4th. And then if we back from that, reviewing a draft of the report, and our votes would be on the 21st, or what do you think, Jason? Where would we? Or would we do our votes on the 4th?
May I
Do our
comment
votes
on
the
that?
4th, and then-
Sure.
So just because I came on so late and I'm going back through old meetings and watching them and taking notes, and I might have follow-up questions for some department heads, if it's possible that we can wait till the 4th of April to vote, I would appreciate it, because I want to have some time to do that. I missed 3 meetings.
Easily.
Yeah, because typically what happens too is we have a draft that we discuss, we take our votes. It's in pretty good shape, except for maybe some of the commentary or, additional ideas that we would discuss in that final meeting when we're taking report. And then usually there's a motion that allows me to finalize the report, the chair to finalize the report with staff to just clean it up based on the results of our final meeting. And do we know timeline for getting that into the publication of the town meeting booklets?
I will find out.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know the printing deadlines.
What do you think, Tim?
I know, because I did this last year, that, as you can see, a lot of this is driven by ARPA funds, because a lot of that was getting distributed last year. But otherwise, it's pretty much a template, and nothing in here, as far as the template goes, needs to change. It's obviously the dollar amounts, the percentages, and everything else need to change. But otherwise, I don't see anything in our process this year that's as impactful as the allocation of ARPA funds was last year. So it's pretty, from a report standpoint, it's straightforward this year. There isn't anything out of the ordinary. So it's almost like we can have the template of the report done. And then you just, once we finalize everything, you just drop in the dollar amounts and the percentages, and then it's good to go. Is that?
Yeah, so Tim, you kind of hit on what I was suggesting in different words, but next week, maybe having a draft put together with the relevant information from this year.
Okay.
And you folks can tailor it to going forward, but to Jeff's point, he wants to get familiar with some of the things before taking a vote on recommendations. So I think we'll put the template together
If we
for
do the
next week.
template for next week, that sounds good.
And I think typically within that vote, with the votes, there's been a vote taken to authorize the administration to work with the chair to finalize the report if there's any small details that need to be ironed out before it's printed.
I think that's what we did last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I first came on this board, the chairman wrote the report and got information or any prose or anything else that she wanted from other members. But she essentially did the whole thing. We had a chairman who was dedicated. I'm not saying you're not dedicated, but really, took it on like, Grant took Richmond, sort of thing. And that resulted in her doing the most of the work, and then we would critique it at a meeting. And then the biggest problem always was getting it done soon enough for it to get printed to be ready. You really need to figure on 2 weeks, probably. 2 weeks?
I'll find out. I'll find
Yeah.
out. I'm not sure, to be
Because
honest with you.
there's so many things that have to be done at the last minute and unexpected things before town meeting, that if we can get our stuff into the stream before that, so much the better.
To that point too, I think it's helpful, you know, in terms of deadlines, we have a nice copier here, but I think in prior years, we've ended up printing a lot of copies of things on the copier because it was past the deadline of getting something to a professional
Yeah.
printer in order to print. So I'm sure if I talk to the administrative assistants in the administrator's office, I think that they'd probably prefer we go through a professional
Yeah.
printer rather than
Less effort
the
on them.
machine in there.
Well, towards that bit about last year, we had we had some significant comments what we wanted to make sure. Are there any topics this year that any of the committee members feel that we need to talk about or document beyond what would be the standard template?
Part of it is we don't know because we're still playing catch-up a little bit here. So, it's a hard question to answer. You know, we've got another week of presentations
Yeah.
coming, you know, so.
So I would say towards that, knowing that we're a draft template
Right.
at next meeting, have that in our mind. There are additional things we want to add into the report, and then we'll be in a position to talk about what those might be, and then we can
Right.
incorporate those into the draft. Any other?
Are there anything ARPA-related for this year, for town meeting, do you know of?
I don't believe there's anything that's coming out of the capital plan as a result of the ARPA approach.
Okay.
I don't have details on what the remaining amount in ARPA is going to be spent on yet. I believe Tim, the administrator, is working with the select board on coming up with a final plan. Tim had an initial memo that he was sending around that had the town administrator that had a tabulated total of a lot of requests that had come through from departments, and most of it was not things that were already considered by the capital plan, and it well exceeded the amount that was left in ARPA. So I don't know if everything on that list had merit to it, but I think that taking the discussion about ARPA out of this is probably, it's not a very worthwhile discussion, and
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. There's nothing
Yeah.
that impacts our process from an appropriation
Right.
standpoint.
Right.
Other than the lack of a plan for ARPA. So if there's one thing I'm tempted or intend to put in this report, is that the lack of a plan is impacting what's considered by financial planning in terms of capital spending, what's considered by us in terms of some of the operational budget offsets that could occur. So this year it's more of a lack of knowledge of how that money might be spent, whether it's going to go towards some of those things. And so I've got that placeholder in the back of my mind.
Probably more importantly, whether anything that the ARPA is spent on is going to create a structural problem that we're going to have to deal with.
Right,
On an ongoing
right.
basis.
So those types of applications of that money that are
Right.
very important to us in terms of, does it pay for something, increased staff, for example, that
Right,
would be it.
right.
Now, I haven't heard any of those as possibilities, but for me, it's an unknown.
It's
Unknown.
Right.
And that I'm kind of keeping a placeholder that we still might want to have some statement of impact of not having a plan for the ARPA money. And so I'm holding on to that one a little bit.
Maybe even a little stronger in saying that it's bad that we don't have a plan, and whatever is done with those funds should not be something that creates
Exactly.
a structural.
Yeah, a restatement
You know,
of
that'd
our
be a
financial
statement of-
policies.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So something along those lines.
Yeah.
I'm not much for window boxes in the center of town, and that's how I look on some plans that have been advanced. And I would like to see, for example, that fire engine that was not funded with ARPA funds last town meeting. I thought that was a disgrace. I mean, why? Why? You want to hold on to it. I mean, what do you want to have, a tea party or something?
Well, it
And
did.
we don't know.
That did create a structural thing in that now we're borrowing money to pay for that fire engine, and that's a structural issue. and that
Additional
affects all the other things we've got coming
$250,000
out
that
of
could have
it.
been
Yeah.
used somewhere else. Yeah. So, and I've made my own statements on that topic in public as well. But that's what I'm thinking in my mind of, in terms of additional content of the report is that we don't know what the plan is, and here's a
Yeah.
financial planning.
What did we say last year about the bylaw?
We were
did we?
pretty strong on that last year.
Yeah,
So one
And I
one
made it
bright
known
side is
at the
like-
meeting too, that
one
we
of the
approved
most-
the fire engines, but that we strongly recommend that ARPA funds be used at the
Yeah.
meeting. So we were very clear with,
Oh, yeah.
with what our recommendations were on that front. The only other thing I would put in, or think about including for any statement around ARPA funds is, the biggest issue for me with the fire engine and the tight tank was that not only did they not use the funds as was recommended by various boards,
including the town meeting itself.
yeah, but it increased taxes for the residents.
Yeah.
So ARPA funds should be used to offset in any way possible any tax increases for the residents, which they haven't done yet.
Good.
I would say this, Tim, just to be fair, one of the biggest allocations from ARPA so far was the Proctor roof, which did come out,
Yeah,
that
that's
did get
true.
moved out of the capital plan. And the other thing, one of the most recent allocations that Tim put forward was purchasing the LED streetlights. So there are going to be some taxpayer savings as a result of leveraging that money. So, I mean, I want to be patient and see what Tim comes up with for a final recommendation, working with the board, because I think that, you know, I was pleased to see that as, the LED lights, I think, is going to be something that's a very good use, because it's going to take burning a utility that we don't need to be burning by having these street lights replaced is.
That's a structural savings.
It's a
that's
structural
gonna go on for
savings,
years.
yeah, so.
And those are the types of, that's
Yeah.
exactly the types of projects we'd like to see
Right.
the ARPA money used for, right? Something that is expenditures now that are savings in
The future.
all the subsequent years.
Right.
Yeah, leveraging this one-time money to achieve savings.
Exactly
and-
that. So I know this topic came up at financial planning as well. Susan, did you have any additional comments you wanted to make from a financial planning perspective?
I wanted to start with your schedule by just letting you know that we are meeting next Tuesday at 5 o'clock, so we can punch through everything and have a vote with a draft report that we can get to you probably by the end of next week, potentially. It all depends on what he gets done within the office and Diane. So you will have that on your desk for you, you will have financial planning's report and our votes in the next week.
That's awesome.
All right, so
That's
we're
great.
trying to stay to process. I was gonna suggest to you, I don't know if you meet all the way to the 1st of April. My recollection of the past is that there is a lead time for printing. And that maybe you could have a special meeting before the meeting with the Board of Selectmen or afterwards and take your votes then. So you could get the paperwork printed.
That's an interesting point, that if we did need to insert additional meeting into our schedule, doing something just prior on the 25th or something like that, if our schedules permit, we could fit in a little bit of time on that. But let's see how we do next week.
Yeah, I think if we meet on the 21st and know where we're at that meeting, that gives us enough time to post gives you enough time to post a meeting to,
Yeah, okay.
on the
And then
joint
I just
hearing
wanted
date.
to say in regard to ARPA, what we did find out this year, whatever is in the capital plan for this year, there's a large piece of equipment needed by the fire station. But it takes a couple of years for it to come, so the money wouldn't be expended by the 2026. So we understand that we're gonna have to bond for that, and we can't request ARPA funds. So it's like too late for that.
Thank you, Susan.
Would we want to potentially reserve time on the 28th if we need an extra meeting? You know, we're meeting on Monday, the 25th is the joint meeting. And then we have nothing else scheduled that week, and April 4th, you know, so the 28th is kind of an open Thursday. If we need it, would
Yeah,
that be
let's,
a good place to put it?
yeah, so let's keep that kind of open on our personal calendars, and then if
Yes.
that looks like it's needed, we'll
Right,
we'll
if
pull
we
the
don't
trigger
need
on
it,
that.
that's great, but,
And anything that entire week, I think I told you the 25th and 29th, I'll be on a business trip in Philadelphia, but I can attend
Able to go
remotely.
remotely, so we'll see. Jason, have you heard anything about?
I think it's imminent.
Okay, that's what I think. Oh, I'm sorry, I do know. The meeting on the 25th will be hybrid remote if everything goes according to plan.
okay.
So that will be, that might, so that
Would be
might be your
perfect for me.
opportunity to
And
be
then on
able
the
to
28th,
participate.
if we do need a meeting, even if I'm just attending by phone, I think that's sufficient, right? Even just on the phone. I can call into Scott and just,
But if we do it, we would do it using a hybrid.
Yeah.
If you were remote on the 28th, we'll do it from this room using this equipment and you'll
Okay, okay.
hybrid in.
So the meeting on the
Okay,
25th
just-
will be here in person, and the select board will be remote, is that?
I don't know what the distribution is going to be. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
I do. I know what it's gonna be. If I were a betting man.
if Congress doesn't appropriate us funds by the 23rd, I'm not going on this trip anyway.
Oh, there you go.
We'll see what happens in Congress.
And darn, I just looked at
God
my
bless
notes and I have
everyone.
a question I forgot to ask the school department, so I will be following up on email with the school. All right, anything more, so meeting schedule, actually, Jason will come back, but in terms of next week, do we want to try for an earlier start than the 7 PM? And try for 6:30 again?
Yeah, that's,
That
as long as I know.
I know, and that's,
Well, I completely forgot, but yeah,
and then that gives us time for the fire department and these other topics. And then if we insert a review of the draft report, gives us a little extra time for that. Okay, so we'll plan on a 6:30 when Jason returns, Will.
On the 21st, 6:30 start?
Yes, please.
All right. And we talked about the rec department, adding them?
Yes, so thank you. We'll double check with Jason on that.
I thought the schools went very well tonight.
Absolutely, right?
You know, we used to spend better than half a day on that, a Saturday.
Was that also at a time where there wasn't the consistency year to year on the format? Like,
No, it was
They
pretty,
spent a certain amount of time, and again, and I actually kind of appreciated the discussion of it. It's like, here's what's happening, here's what's happening with enrollment, et cetera. So
Yeah.
you had an idea of what they were dealing with, kind of both at the elementary level, at the K-8 level, and at the high school level. And this year, we just talked about the budget.
yeah, so we didn't have those larger
And one way to look at
contextual.
it, that's all we really need to talk about, but it's nice to know what's, you know, that.
The
challenge is
context.
we don't know what's really driving the other things. And they would spend, you know, you could have doubled, if we added that, it would have doubled this meeting, kind of thing, in terms of time. So I'm glad we didn't do it tonight, but I really want to look at that stuff.
That's something if we get a more typical schedule next year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'd have the time for that, but.
For, in that same vein, one thing I would maybe consider is if an amount of time was allocated, for example, the Assabet financial commitment from the town is like 1.5 million, and that was a 45-minute presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The K
Yeah.
through
And then
8.
27 million, and we, yeah.
And we have a $60 million commitment for K through 8 in Algonquin, and that took 45 minutes.
yeah,
Yeah.
You know, so,
Allocate the time
Long been.
proportionally.
yeah.
subject of
Right.
discussion.
And the other thing about it, there's two issues. One is, do we have the information, and the second is, do we have the time? And I read faster than listening kind of thing. And so, you know, that kind of walking through, here's our enrollment, here's our projections by grade and stuff. We don't need to do that by having, you know, Greg kind of go through that time by time, I think, you know. So if we just got that information in advance, and then, you know, if there's anything he wanted to call attention to, and then we could move right into the numbers. So we could probably, if we think about it, speed it up.
Yeah, okay, sounds good.
But having it live is much preferable to listening to somebody just on and on and on and on like we
Right.
did last year. If I could have reached the guy, I would have strangled him.
Sounds good. Jason, while you had
Oh,
stepped
just
away.
one more
Oh, yeah.
comment about the enrollments, and, I mean, it's an interesting point to bring up, but I know there's been multiple years where the shifting enrollment has caused disproportionate spikes in our assessment versus Southborough's, where their budget is going, the regional budget is going up a reasonable amount, whereas our assessment, we're trying to figure out how to fit a 9% increase in our budget while Southborough's facing a decrease. So trying to predict for some of those spikes, I think that we took a long look at one point when we got surprised by this, because we never really looked that closely at school enrollment at the time. It's like we would rely on the superintendent's office to tell us if that was coming down the pike. But, so we took a more active role at looking at enrollments at one point, and I think those kind of trends have tapered off because we had a really large, for whatever reason, we had a really large 8th grade class that went through, and then it kind of stabilized after that. So that increase that we're seeing in that assessment is pretty much breaks down by enrollment close to, like, their percentage increase is pretty close to what our assessment increases are, so
Well,
we
I'm
should
just thinking
probably
in
look at it
general,
again
things like,
internally. And
Is the special education population increasing? Because that's a lot more, that requires a lot more resources and, you know, so just what's happening within the school that's driving the budget? And if you don't know anything about it and you just see the numbers, it's kind of hard to.
I really don't want to be in the position where we get surprised by one of those enrollment spikes
Yeah.
again. So we haven't done some of the, like, what I call our due diligence on some of these things, but that was typically one exercise that we would do early on in the budget process is map out, well, what would happen if, you know, 100% of our 8th graders go to Algonquin next year, and just to try to map out in the future with the 5-year trends and so forth, and hopefully I can get back to that for the 5-year trends when I get to presenting those.
That's good. Susan, do you have a comment?
I was on the regional school committee when those spikes were happening, and one of the things that we talked about at that point in time was that the economy was such that the Southborough people felt much more confident sending their kids to private school. And so you would see not 100% of their kids coming, maybe only 92% of their kids would be coming. But you'd get 99% of the kids from Northborough coming up to the high school. And then the cost of college escalated, and then you started to see that kind of just even out a little bit more. I think that's why we're seeing a lot of that. And then the economy the way it is now, people probably aren't spending that extra money. But I mean, private school now costs as much and more than a private school tuition, you know, for college, so.
Oh, yeah.
But that's when we saw the spikes.
Yeah.
They went to private school. The economy was such, parents didn't mind spending the money.
There was also a point, probably 15, 18 years ago, that the school superintendent did not speak to the town administrator. And the school,
Surprises.
it was, I think it was the first year I came on this, and it was quite difficult. And it was a situation where the superintendent assumed sainthood, and the town administrator became the devil.
Yeah, so we've had the luxury, not even the luxury, but we've been in synchronization
Yeah.
between all the
Much
departments
better.
over the last, I don't know, 10 to 14 years.
3 or 4 administrations of the school department. Superintendent
Oh,
support
yeah,
very
it
well with
was
this.
pretty bad.
So-
Jason, in terms of, as you stepped out, we just talked a little bit more about next week. If we can post a 6:30 start from an agenda perspective.
Okay.
And then, did we hear back if we'd get Recreation Department budget information?
Okay, so they didn't, I know you asked for that early on, but that didn't make it to this agenda, but we'll try to get her to come next week.
Okay, if not, the department head themselves, just, the information.
Some information about it, yeah.
Yeah, so not knowing what Ally's schedule is. Great. Okay, so we talked about.
That may actually be pretty significant this year, because didn't we hear that this is the first year that they don't have sufficient fees
Yes.
to support their programs, and so we might need someone to come to speak to
Yeah,
that.
Ally will be
so
able to
basically, the mechanics are that we transfer an amount in from the recreation revolving fund that's equivalent to the amount of the salaries in the general fund. And that's for a couple reasons. I mean, it's in our financial policies, it's written in that were adopted by the select board, that 100% of the department's overhead is gonna be covered by their fees. It's a non-binding financial policy that the town has adopted for itself. The second part of that is just Mass General Law says you can't pay full-time salaries out of the recreation fund under the authorization that it's adopted under. So transferring it out is a legal way that we are able to pay the salaries in the general fund for the 2 employees that work for the recreation fund. Post-pandemic, I'm not sure that we've ever gotten back to the 100% funding the department, and there's obviously the program shut down for post-2020, and then came back, but I'm not sure it's gotten on solid financial footing since then. And another factor is it's heavily dependent on, I think they bank most of their money after their summer programs, because a lot of parents use the program in lieu of daycare. And
I'm one of those people that do
Okay.
that.
It's a valued and heavily used program, and that's when the majority of the money flows into the program. So typically, they've had some scheduling issues with the schools where they have to use the schools for the space, and the schools have either been doing some back-to-school renovation projects or things like that, so they've lost a week at some points on both ends, which has been kind of critical toward their funding. So this year, in our financial models that were presented, their full salary contingent is in the town's budget, but the transfer in to cover it is about 60,000 short of the full budget. So just did that answer some questions about
I
the
think so,
mechanics
yeah.
of it? Okay. All right, so otherwise, the rest of the program's expenses, the part-time staff and the vendors that they pay are funded they flow through the recreation revolving fund, so it's not recorded within the general fund in any way.
Okay.
But yeah, we should have her come, and we typically internally look at our numbers pretty closely before we set the budget. But again, another challenging thing about the recreation fund is that she's already started taking registrations and collecting money for the summer programs. It's not really revenue we can recognize because we haven't fulfilled the programs yet. So,
Yeah.
so it's another caveat of the law that it's authorized under, where we're not allowed to carry over more than $10,000 in the fund. But how much is in the fund? Cash-wise, it's a lot, like $300,000, $400,000 at the end of the year. But over the course of the summer, that money flows through that fund and out, and we don't typically know exactly where we've ended up until September. So it's a little bit of an unusual accounting exercise for that department specifically. But.
Okay.
And Ally, if she doesn't
Yeah.
come to the next meeting, she'll appreciate that I explained this
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
ahead of
yeah.
time.
And the benefit if she can come, because like the other department heads, it's a chance to show the pride in the programs and the things that are being
Yeah.
accomplished, you know, and to
Yeah.
demonstrate the services that are being delivered.
Yeah, it is a heavily used program, and she does have a lot of programs.
Yep. Yeah, that's for sure, right? Okay. Budget update?
Okay, so on Monday night, I delivered an update on where we were with the general fund budget to the select board. I don't know if anybody had a chance to see it, or I can just go briefly. In your packet is the presentation that I gave that night. I'll make it short, so we're not here till 11 o'clock.
The first few are a repeat of what you
Basically
presented
a
to us
report,
at the
yes,
beginning,
yeah.
which now that I understand tax effort, I'm on top of that now. So I think if I had to orient us to the new information, it's,
So, I mean, I added the slide here with the graph of the surrounding communities ranking in the state for single-family homes. It's nice and colorful, so I like to call attention to it, but it kind of shows our relative perspective in the state relative to our neighbors, and it's interesting. This is the first time I looked at it in this, plotted this way, and I felt like it was pretty interesting to see that we're kind of in the middle of, you know, Southborough and Westborough above us, and then the rest of the towns that are our neighbors below us, and that gap has existed for some time.
and once again, on this scale, we want to be as
Yeah, this is the.
high as
the-
possible.
The higher the number, the lower your
yeah,
tax bill
yeah.
relative to everybody else.
And the y-axis here is ranking,
Is statewide ranking of the 351 cities and towns.
right?
We have benefited by educated employees who know what they're doing. And when, several years ago, when we compared ourselves to our neighboring town, we found out that their employment selection was quite different from ours and had not as strong a basis in education and experience. Now, how do you like that for going around the?
Oh, I like that.
Good stuff.
All right, so I think this is basically the same new revenue that we had before, so it's the same information that's been presented before. Again, so if we flip to slide 10, this is just the current budget model showing all the sources. So obviously the biggest source of the town's funding of its budget is our tax receipts. And below that, state aid. Use of available funds is free cash. Overlay surplus is being proposed to be used in the capital plan this year. Local receipts, we raised that estimate based on our investment income performance.
Okay.
And other funds include the recreation transfer that we discussed a moment ago. I would highlight on slide number 11 that this, based on Ernie Hall's updated budget,
Yeah, it was slightly
the
different.
slightly changes, so their 13.57% increase goes down to 9.48%, because that 1.3 million is reduced to 1.286 million. The overall school's request is 5.4% from 5.5. And the town's budget's fixed cost increase on the next slide. This isn't any different from what I presented last week to this group with the undistributed expenses. The health insurance, I don't know if we mentioned it, I have said it before, but I don't know if I mentioned it this year, but we're a member of a JPA with the joint purchasing arrangement with the schools and the town of Southborough. So when he was saying they were facing a 10% increase and they settled on 7.9%, those are the same factors that we're presenting here for our health insurance increase. And again, I said we had, last week, we looked at the roster very closely and we reduced some of our surplus within the health insurance budget. So the budget, we were looking at a $600,000 increase originally when we put these numbers together, but now it's down to 4.4% with or $272,000 increase with the 8% premium increase. We obviously have a lot more employees that are subject to the Worcester Regional system than the district. I noticed their increase was $63,000, whereas ours is $315 in the retirement system, the pension assessment. So the fixed costs, the non-departmental requests within what's considered the town budget are up $885,000. Very close to the town department's requests that are still being reviewed internally. I know that there's, you've heard from most people, and we haven't changed anything since we've met in a large way.
Okay.
I think there was a revision to the police budget that had it going down somewhat since we met with them. But other than that, the department's budgets are basically reflected within the 7.79%. I think the only departments you haven't heard from are the departments that the administrator's office controls and the town clerk's office. So we're still working on those.
Okay.
Oh, the clerks are done, but the administrator's office lines are still being worked on. So overall, if those projections come through, it's a 7.82% for town budget increase, and the magnitude of that is, the $1 or $2 million. And then included within that are a number of new positions, and that's we heard about the patrolman, and I think the statistics are linked in that justify adding staff to that department. Tim?
I know that the previous town administrator was pushing for an organizational-wide staff study to be done, requesting ARPA money to be used to fund that, so that when these positions came in, or these requests came in, there was some analytical study done to support how many, where they're needed, make sure that every department's getting the resources that they need. Do you know if that's?
Okay, so I don't think that's a bad idea to do an organizational study, but again, at some point, it turns into, we would have to go out and procure a organizational study, and then this is a longer delay, and I know one has not been done or conducted since the former town administrator that had suggested that idea had left. So some of these ideas are just ones that came up as a result of weighing certain data that was presented to the town administrator, and these were his priorities that came out of the budget cycle that our new town administrator that we're working with. I know the police, they had data that showed the number of calls versus the demands on the department. There was a
lot of comparative data.
comparative data to the other communities and per capita officers and so forth. So I feel like that was would have been represented by that staffing study would have come out probably with a similar recommendation. I know my own self-interest, the town accountant position, I'm in favor of, just because
I'm not saying that these positions
Yeah,
aren't
no,
needed.
but you're asking.
But you like
like-
doing two jobs, come on.
But, no, well,
Right.
it is, I mean, and it's not unusual for a community to have a finance director that's also the town accountant, so it's not unusual, but as.
It's an
the-
$80 million budget, you should have some
As-
help.
Well, yeah, as the budgets have grown and the demands have grown for the position, the regulatory environment we're in, we've had an explosion of grants and contract administration. We're dealing with a lot more paperwork and a lot more administrations required of these positions. I'll just quote one of the interims who said, "Why would we do a staffing study to tell us that when I know that we need it?" So like, that was a little bit, you know, if that pushed back the need to have a staffing study, I don't know, that was kind of the thought, was that we could handle some of those rather than going out and studying something, using a third party to tell us some of the things that we could evaluate ourselves, that was kind of behind the delay between now and that actually happening.
Right, well, I think it's unfortunate that one hasn't been done, it's unfortunate that one is not in the works, it's unfortunate that we had the money to do one, because my concern is we start hiring these people, which raises the possibility or encourages other departments to make similar requests next year, the year after. We've talked about the grant for the fire department coming through and how that's going to impact things. And a staffing study would have given us the tools and the information to say, yes, you know, an assistant library director at $78,000 is needed. Versus, you know, next year when another department comes through and says, well, you hired an assistant library director last year, we need an assistant XYZ for the same amount of money, you gave it to them. And just seeing that, it's just unfortunate that it hasn't been done. It would have been a helpful tool to have, that information laid out, done from somebody that's professional, not biased, can go through everything, and when those requests come in, are they reasonable or not?
I think as a future tool for planning, I anticipate that there will be additional staffing requests, you know,
Yes.
in the subsequent years. So I don't think it's too late to do. I don't think we've missed an opportunity. I think are recommending a staffing
It would
study
be good
to
to
be
do it.
done.
It would have been nice to have done it earlier, but we
But there's-
shouldn't put it off.
That it still has benefits
Yeah.
to evaluate future needs and really give the departments and give the staff the analysis and the
Well, give the
justification they need.
taxpayers, give the community some reason why, you know. The fire department came through and they presented their case, it's needed. We need to hire another police officer. You can go back to the community when people have questions and lay out the reasons why we need to make the hire. We should be able to do that for every position and anticipated positions in the future. Not saying that it's not needed. I would assume there's quite a bit of pent-up demand in all the departments for additional staff. Just be nice to know, again, from a professional, unbiased person, where and how much and what the correct allocation is for resources.
I don't disagree. So, moving on to the.
So that,
I would just
that'll
point
be
out with
something
the-
I will pass it, of course,
I
you
can-
will
I can
talk
pass
to the
that
town
along, yeah.
administrator as well, but I'll make sure, talk to,
Good report.
that it's still a needed item.
And I just want to make one last comment about the library assistants. I know there was a long-standing agreement that there was a number of staff. There's hours that were increased at the library, and the library trust funds had made up for the difference in hours, and there was a phased approach coming through that was agreed to by multiple administrators, that these hours would get brought back. That's for the increase in the library assistant's hours, but the assistant director was a position that existed and had been cut some years ago, and the attempt was to bring it back when when we had met with the library director.
I thought the library did a pretty effective job too, just illustrating just how much growth they've had in the services provided, the number of people that are coming through every day, all the touches, all the different, I think it's like exponential growth that they've experienced. So I think they at least, I mean, they did
Yeah,
kind of
they-
make a case for it.
They did make a very data-driven case for it.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of data behind the use of their building.
Yes.
Would the chairman entertain a motion to adjourn?
We're almost there. We're almost Jason, other significant changes? You've summarized the capital plan.
Yeah, so this is basically everything you've seen with the capital plan. I think we've shared that already and gone through the capital requests.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, again, this budget, the status of the reserves and the use of free cash, our reserves are in the neighborhood of 8%, which is consistent with the past levels, so we should have a favorable look when we're looked at by bond rating agencies. Yep. All right, so last page, tax impact with the reduction in asset bets. Unfortunately, we didn't have that before, but we're now down below 7% with the projection 6.9%, or $619
Okay.
from what it was presented on Monday.
I'm fine with
So,
that.
like, in terms of just talking about the, that's a larger than usual increase, but to set some like goalposts that we were gonna end up in between, because we're still developing these budgets, they're still subject to change somewhat. They're not gonna change wildly. The request that gets presented on the 25th isn't gonna be wildly different from this. However, if we were to determine goalposts to start with, the school budgets would probably be largely unchanged. The school committees approved those budgets when we came into this. The fixed costs aren't likely to change much. So we could reduce those slightly maybe if we didn't entertain adding staff. So with that would have meant the town budget would increase 3.5%. And with the school requests and that 3.5% increase, that's already having us use all the new revenues. So at that point, it's not likely the department request could be 0%, but if they were, that would have been a $464 tax increase. So a 5.2% or $464 tax increase. When we tabulated the initial budget requests that had come through the departments before we had met with them, that was an 11% town budget increase. So these weren't the only staff that was requested. This is just what made it through the committee and became the administrator's priorities for this year. Yeah, and if health insurance was still at 10%, that would have been a $745 tax increase or 8.4%. So in terms of like goalposts, that was the purpose of including those numbers here.
Part of the way I was kind of looking at this is thinking about it as the average resident living in the average house and kind of thing, and dealing with all the things that the average resident is dealing with, and food more expensive and everything else. That big a percentage sounds like something that's gonna get people excited, and one of the exercises I was wondering is what would it take to get down to, say, like the 5% increase in taxes? And as you mentioned, it would, in other words, how big, is it even possible, I guess, is,
Right,
fixed costs
and
won't change, school budget won't change, and actually the school's adding quite a few new positions. But, so is there an opportunity here, kind of, is it even worth looking for an opportunity here to reduce the impact on the average homeowner and?
Right, I mean, there's gonna be some challenges with reducing this further, so like I said, if we accepted that it's gonna be 5% based on the fixed costs and the school requests,
Right.
we're talking
Yeah,
about a
1.9%,
bandwidth between
right.
464 and 619 and 745, and that was the point of including that, to develop a set of goalposts for the
Yeah.
model. And
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
My apologies for not moving this last order of business.
Oh, yeah, I almost forgot about
higher on the agenda, because we probably should have taken care of it earlier. But we do have a request for the transfer from, or two transfers from the reserve fund. So there's a memo at the end that Tim wrote earlier today. And Jason, you
Scott,
want
if
to
you don't,
summarize
if you don't
this real
mind, there is an alteration to this. So if you were to entertain a motion to do this, the $15,000 being requested for Public Works is actually $10,000 being requested by the Information Systems Department.
Yes.
So
Okay.
it's the same,
Yes.
the heart of this is the same, but the quote
Yep.
was less when.
So
So
I don't
two-
know if all the members had a chance to review this memo or not.
I did this afternoon.
Okay, so basically, to summarize for the recording, to help reduce the risk, that's the way I'm thinking of it, for the police station exterior painting and repair. The idea is to transfer $5,000 from the appropriations reserve to allow an architect to do a proper estimate. This was discussed at the select board meeting Monday, as well as, I can't remember if it came up Tuesday with financial planning, probably not. But anyway, this would.
It did come up on Tuesday.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
And so this is a way to get a better estimate out of that $200,000 capital request. And then, we had a piece of equipment that broke, needs to be replaced. It's used heavily by the different departments. And so an updated quote.
So the plotter is 10,000.
Plotter is 10,000 instead of 15,000. So the motion would be, and do we need two separate?
Yeah, one motion would be to transfer $5,000 to the Facilities Division of the Department of Public Works, and then the other motion would be to transfer $10,000 to the MIS.
Yes. So, I'll do it this way. I'd entertain a motion for the transfer of $5,000 from the Appropriations Reserve to the Department of Public Works facilities for the architectural estimate on the
So moved.
exterior.
Second.
Okay, Janice and George, all in favor? Sounds good. I could have asked for further discussion, my apologies if there was any. And then I'd entertain a motion for the transfer of $10,000 from the Appropriations Reserve to the MIS department for the purchase of a plotter.
So moved.
In a second?
Second?
Seconded
Third,
Tim.
fourth.
Any discussion on that?
No.
Great. All in favor? Passes unanimously as well. Thank you for that bit there. And, I could have mentioned, this is what the reserves are for, right? Is these last minute end of budget year,
It's not the
unforeseen events.
strangest one we've ever been asked for.
That's for sure. Jason, any further items for us this evening?
Yeah, I would just add that one thing you can be assured about is that we've made it through the winter without overexpending the snow and ice budget.
Yeah.
Yet, I don't know if there's hidden bills somewhere, but.
We'll have the big April snowstorm.
One of the
Saves
things
us a
that
meeting.
we've prided ourselves on is always closing the gap for the deficit in snow and ice, so we're not you're allowed to overspend snow and ice, but it carries forward to next year's tax rate, and we've always closed the gap for 20-something years of the snow and ice deficit within the year, so by making these transfers, so we're not gonna need these funds to close a gap in snow and ice, so you can feel assured about that.
All good. All right, now I'm ready, Janice.
Would the chairman entertain a motion to adjourn?
Yes, please, a second on that?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank God.